I'd like to call this July 20th meeting of the Wilson County Board of Education to order. Before we approve the agenda, I would like to ask if you would look at action item C, year-end budget amendments. We need to move that, we can move that from an action item to an informational item, as on June 8th, we gave Dr. Mills the authority to act on these year-end budget items. So if you would make that notation, that will be, we will still leave it, no. We will move it to become item C under information items and take it from the action items. With that change, members of the board, I ask for the approval of the agenda.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell.
I move that we approve the agenda for July 20th, 2020 for the Wilson County Board of Education with the one stated change.
Is there? It has been moved by Mrs. Powell, seconded by Mr. Mercer, that we approve the July 20th, 2020 agenda with the stated change. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Mrs. Boyette, we're going to start you with the votes for today.
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Farmer?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
And myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect the motion carries unanimously. I would ask that before we get started, let me welcome community members who are currently joining us today, as we are live streaming on YouTube for the first time. So we thank you very much for tuning in for this meeting. I'll now ask Mrs. Powell to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, to be followed by a moment of silence.
Stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Members of the board, we have minutes of previous meetings that need approval. We have the minutes of June 8th, 2020, which was a regular meeting, June 22nd, 2020, which was a special meeting, and July 13th, 2020, which was a special meeting. What is your pleasure?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Barnes?
I move that we approve the regular board meeting minutes of June 8th, 2020, the minutes of the special board meeting, June 22nd, 2020, and July 13th, 2020 special meeting.
Second.
It has been moved by Mrs. Barnes, seconded by Mr. Mercer, that we approve the June 18th, 2020 regular board meeting minutes, June 22nd, 2020 special board meeting minutes, and July 13th, 2020 minutes, special board meeting. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, let it be known by the sign of aye. Mrs. Boyette?
Aye.
Mr. Breen?
Aye.
Mr. Farmer?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
And myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. Under the chairman's report, on Friday, July 17th, 2020, filing closed for school board seats in District 2, 4, and 6. Three-term board member Gary Farmer of District 6 did not file for re-election. We thank him for his continued service and look forward to his continued work for the remainder of his term through November 2020. Mr. Mercer from District 4 and Mrs. Barnes from District 2 have filed to continue their service to Wilson County Schools. Mr. Mercer has no filed opposition while Mrs. Barnes does. We acknowledge the individuals who have filed to seek election. Mr. Henry Williams, Herbert Olinger, and William Boykin for District 6 seat, excuse me, and Roger Hudson for District 2 seat. We will be in contact with them to invite them to attend an orientation session regarding board service at a date to be determined. And that is the chairman's report. Dr. Mills?
Madam Chair, board members and others, got a lot of good news to share and some dates or programmatic pieces. I want to remind everyone, families, that our summer food sites are up and running at 4 schools and also at community sites across the county. That's for a period longer. Ms. Mary Catherine Talbot is on the meeting with us as well. But the schools are Hearn, Garden, Lucama, and Forest Hills, and the sites are open from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. That's the summer food sites are still up and running.
And when do they close?
August 31st.
So there is overlap then with.
There's a little bit of overlap for that first part. And that's Hearn, Darden, Lucama, and Forest Hills from 12 to 1:30. Ms. Lynch wanted to remind everyone that we're busy collecting donations for our annual backpack drive. And she wanted to thank everyone who's donated so far for Operation Backpack. The donation deadline is July 31st. You can find more information about that on our website and social media. All the backpacks that we collect will be sent straight to the schools this year, and staff will make sure that students who are in the most need of backpack get one prior to the first day of school. That was something we talked about doing prior to the pandemic and some of the closures. Something special to share was a few weeks ago, we surprised one of our Bedingfield High School graduates, Mary Ashley Sauls, with a 2020 Owen Scholarship. Myself, Dr. Tribula, principal at Bedingfield High School, assistant principal Ms. Carter, and one of Ashley's favorite teachers, Ms. Moravi, showed up at her work and surprised her. In fact, we had to make sure she was going to be back at work because she'd gotten off early from a shift and was coming back later. So we went up to Stampsburg and surprised her there with one of those big checks with her name on it, and we're waiting on her. And she will receive $7,000 a year towards her college tuition for 4 years, and she's going to start at Wilson Community College and then go to East Carolina University. And we're really excited because she will come back and teach with us. She was very humbled and very excited and very surprised, and she did a great job during her interview. The Owen Scholarship began in 1998 when Alfred and Myrtle Owens created a private trust that is part of the school system's opportunities for our students to have scholarship to come back and teach with us. She is the 130th recipient of the scholarships. So there's some good news during some times when seems like it's been a while before we've had some semblance of normal, some of our routines. So I want to share that. Congratulations to Mary Sauls when you see her. And she works at Highway 55 in Stansburg, so there's a shameless plug for them and for her. So tip well and go check on her. I want to recognize 2 talented assistant principals, Casey Wester and LaToya Washington, for being selected to participate in the 2021 Future Ready Leadership Program through the NC Principals and Assistant Principals Association. That's NC PAPA. They will attend monthly sessions at the Friday Institute in Raleigh that will cover topics such as becoming an instructional leader, creating a healthy school culture, and maximizing relationship with students. We've had several people attend over the last several years, and know this will be a great experience for them. So congratulate Casey or LaToya if you see them. I wanted to also recognize this month Instructional Technology Facilitator Deepak Sharma for earning his Certified Education Technology Leader, CETL, certification through the Consortium for School Networking. This represents the highest standards of excellence in the educational technology industry. This is a huge accomplishment and not one where you can just kind of study the curriculum and pass the test. You have to know what you're doing at a very high level and have some mileage on you and some experience in the area, and it's very challenging. Those who earn the certification have spent years in the technology industry and have a wealth of knowledge, and DPAC is one of those that does and represented us well in earning that credential. We want to congratulate Mr. Sharma again on this accomplishment. Thank him for really going above and beyond to get this for how it benefits our students and our system. So if you do see him, congratulate him. It is a big deal. We want to congratulate the 43 members of our WCS family who retired during the 1920 school year. We will be having something for them after the fact when we can get back into a routine and do that. I am not going to try and read all those names for the interest of all of us, but it is always bittersweet to see folks who we spend a lot of time working with and giving so much to our system leave us, but it is satisfying to know that they're at a point in their careers when they can do that and spend time with their families doing things they like to do, in addition to coming back and volunteering, which is what we would be emphasizing. But we're very grateful for their selfless service to our students and our system. And again, we'll be sharing them later when we have more time. Finally, I wanted to just share with the board briefly that I've been elected to represent our region on the North Carolina School Superintendent's Association Executive Board. I represent Region 3, and that started this month. And so we've been obviously having lots of Zoom meetings to talk about what's happening across the state with the closures and the reopening and the impact it's having on school systems across the state. So for Region 3, I'll be representing the RESA across the state organization. It's a really good group, and we've had several meetings, and it's I'm very honored to be asked to represent our RESA in that undertaking. So, Madam Chair, board members, that's all I had.
Thank you. Let me extend on behalf of the board our congratulations on that service that you will be rendering.
Sure.
Next on our agenda is the public input. Each person is granted 3 minutes for his or her presentation. The portion of the meeting is for the board to hear matters of interest from the public. However, obscene or vulgar statements, personal attacks, and statements reasonably perceived to be disruptive or immediately threatening to the orderly operation of the meeting shall not be permitted. We do have one person who has signed up to address the board. A letter was submitted by Ms. Jennifer Joyner regarding Mrs. Dixon. We have asked Media Director Amber Lynch if she will read the letter that has been submitted by Mrs. Joyner.
Okay,
Pearson.
start the letter now. Our family has been at New Hope for 7 years. I think back on the changes we had in administration over those 7 years. Ms. Flowers was the face of our school when she was principal. You saw her face daily at drop-off and pickup and throughout the day if you were there. Mr. Joyner came in for a small period of time, and within days, all of the kids knew who he was. That's how I feel about Ms. Dixon. She is the face of the school. Everyone knows her because of her infectious smile and her love for the students and their families. Within the first week of her role as assistant principal, my whole family knew her name and she knew ours, including the name of our dog. One day we arrived at school and my daughter began to cry when she got out of the car. Ms. Dixon immediately went to her and consoled her. She walked her to class and made sure she was okay. She went back later in the day to check on my daughter because she sees my child as a whole person, not just a number in a seat. She knows that the emotional well-being of a child is important too. My daughter came home and told me Dixon took care of her. Last school year, 2018-19, was my son's last year at New Hope. After a poor score on his reading EOGs as a student who makes mostly A's, Ms. Dixon gave him the pep talk he needed. She wrote him a note that summer as well, and he still has it posted in his room because her words were encouraging to him. He knows that she really cares. He has a goal for getting his Eagle Scout, and he told her all about it. She still checks in on him to see how school is going and how the steps to Eagle are going. When he transitioned to middle school, she took time out of her day to talk to me about some of the issues he was having with transition. He was no longer her student, but she still cared enough to take the time. When I volunteered to proctor for testing, I was on hallway duty. She insisted that I have a comfortable chair and rolled her own office chair out for me. She always makes sure students and parents know they are cared for and important. All it takes is a walk into her office to see that students at New Hope love her. She has artwork from so many kids displayed because they have drawn pictures or written notes to her to show how much they care about her, because they know that she cares about them. Her door is always open and she takes time for students and parents. You will see it on the faces of the kids when they see her. And you see her smile is all. Go to a PTO meeting and she will be there. If you see her off campus, she is sure to come over with a smile, and she is genuine. Losing Ms. Dixon at New Hope would be a great loss to everyone, especially the students. She is an asset and an important figure at our school. Jennifer Joyner.
Thank you very much. Members of the board, you have the following options: to direct the chairman to respond to the concern on behalf of the board, to direct the administration to respond to the concern, to refer the matter to a board committee, to refer the matter to the administration, or place the matter of concern on the agenda for a future meeting. What is your pleasure?
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Farmer?
let's let the administration respond to that, please.
All right. Is that a consensus, members of the board?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, all right. We'll ask the administration to please attend to that particular matter. Next on our agenda is the discussion information items. We have 3 items. Wilson County Schools 2020 secondary highlights, contracts for board notification, and year-end budget amendments. Dr. Mills?
First, we have the secondary highlights. I think Mr. Lynn is on call. And Dr.
Yes,
Wilson is here. I'll turn it over to them so they can walk you through the report.
All right.
We have some really good information to share with the board, and Mr. Linden will be going through the documents that you received in your board packet.
Okay. Mr. Linden?
Yes, ma'am. So thank you. Just want to take just a few minutes to share some of the highlights from secondary education for the 2019-2020 school year. This past school year, our 5 high schools graduated just over 780 seniors. Special interest there, Watt had 7 graduates, and all 7 of those graduated within a 4-year span as opposed to the 5-year span that the cohort was designed to graduate. Our school counselors at the high schools work closely with our students to gather information on scholarship opportunities. And the information reported to us across the district, we had 410 scholarships awarded to our students for just under $14 million worth of scholarships offered. Now, knowing that a student could be offered scholarships to multiple institutions, we also look at scholarships accepted, because a student's only going to be able to accept a scholarship to a single institution. So we had $6,107,000 in scholarships that were accepted from our graduating class. Additionally, we had 43 students who, at the time of graduation, had signed letters of intent to pursue a career in the military. You have there the individual school numbers, but I think it's quite impressive that we have over $6 million worth of scholarships that were awarded to our graduating seniors. On page 2 of the document provided to you shows our Latin Designation Awards. As you recall, this is the first year that we recognized our graduates with the Latin designation. We had 54 students that graduated with a recognition of summa cum laude, 38 that graduated as magna cum laude, and 48 that graduated with cum laude. Each of those students was awarded a medal, a medallion that they could wear at the graduation ceremony. On page 3 of that document, through our continued partnership with Wilson Community College, we're able to continue offering opportunities for our students in our comprehensive high schools to take college level courses. The table there shows the breakdown of our students' performances in those courses. Across the district, we had 1,056 college course credits that were offered through CCP. That's 1,056 college credits for students in our comprehensive high schools. That doesn't even include the college credits that our WEPA and WASP students have earned. And you have there the breakdown of the grade distribution across the district by semester and for the total. Beginning on page 4 of that document provides some details of the graduation endorsements that our students are eligible to receive. There are 5 total graduation or diploma endorsements. They are the career endorsement, college endorsement, college UNC endorsement, the North Carolina Academic Scholars endorsement, and the global language endorsement. And on page 6, it reflects the 656 graduation endorsements that our graduates received this year. 122 of those were academic scholars, 229 were college, 237 were UNC college, 49 were in the career endorsement area, and 19 in the global language endorsement area. Overall, our senior class and our secondary education folks had a real bad year, especially to finish out the year the way under the conditions we did. Extremely pleased with the recognition awards our students received and the support that our staff there were able to provide them to help them through the transition.
Is that complete your report?
That's correct.
All right, members of the board, do you have any questions or comments in regard to the information that has been presented regarding the Wilson County Schools 2020 secondary highlights?
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Farmer?
Mr. Linden, Dr. Mills, board members, I pass through Lenore County and Kinston on a regular basis on my trip to the beach. They have 2 huge billboards in both sections, are separation between the county lines there in Lenore County, but one huge one outside New Sporting Goods that has this very exact information. It tells how many graduates that district has and how many scholarships were offered in big, bold letters indicating that, hey, Wilson County or Lenore County, public education is the way to go. And I suggest that maybe if we have money, that we could do something like that to let the people know how successful our seniors have been. And in light of what they have been through, I think this would please them and their parents very well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farmer. Any other comments? I'd like to commend the staff for the work that you have done in putting this information out there. It has been very enlightening. You know, when we moved from valedictorian, salutatorian designation, and we moved to a Latin designation for awards. In giving the data here, we are seeing so many other students who are able to be recognized for their scholastic work And so instead of being 246, we're able to recognize 140 students who earned the Latin designations, and giving them their kudos for the work that they've done. It's always amazing and interesting and fulfilling to see the numbers of scholarships awarded, to see the total amount of dollars that are offered to our students, and to see that total that is actually accepted from our students. And it's always gratifying to see those members of the class who decide to step up, join the military to help protect us in by enlisting for military service. So we thank you for putting this information out to us for our benefit and for the benefit of the public. We often do this at our typical graduations, but this year wasn't typical. And so in this setting today, we're able to put that information out a little more to our public. And we thank you for sharing that information with us. Any other comments? All right, next is the contracts for board notification.
Madam Chair, board members, we've got two contracts I wanted to share with you that are less than $90,000 that I need to inform you of. The first is for ClassLink, and that is the site license, the roster server, and the setup fee in the amount of $43,665. ClassLink is one that's very timely. We've been talking about for a while. That is our single sign-on application, and we'll be talking about that when we go over our reentry plan. And basically what that will allow is, as you log in one time, it gives you access to all the applications that you should normally have to log into. So it would be one sign-on will give you access and rights to all the other applications without having to remember all those passwords and do all that, which is something we've been working towards for a while, but it's pretty timely time to have this on our notification piece. So that's one contract. And then the other is Mentoring Minds, which is from the instructional side, which deals with math resources online as well. And that's in the amount of $42,800.
All right.
Those are for information only.
Thank you very much for that information. We now move to our action items. And the first item is the
Madam Chair,
Mr. McPherson.
the year-end budget amendments, I believe.
Oh, thank you for
Yep.
that reminder.
Yes, ma'am.
You're in budget amendments, Dr. Mills?
Yes, Ms. Evans is on the, in the meeting with us, and she can go through the budget amendments that are for information based on the board having given me authority through the end of the school year.
Good afternoon. Included in your packets were the amendments that Dr. Mills did have the authority to approve on June 30th. And we had amendments for all 8 of our funds: the State Public School Fund, the Current Expense Fund, Federal, Capital Outlay, Child Nutrition, Trust and Agency, the Before and After School Care, and the Local Special Revenue Fund. And all of the amendments were necessary to align the budget and maximize our allotments.
Members of the board, this is information, and but if you have any questions, we'll be happy to allow you the opportunity to ask.
Madam Chair, we pointed out this Ms. Evans' last meeting as the finance officer before she retires.
Yes.
And so I would like to recognize her for all the things she's done for us. And I know she'd rather just scoot away and not be recognized at all, but I did want to point that out to the board.
Thank you for that general reminder, Mrs. Evans. We, as the board, certainly appreciate the outstanding job that you have done and the service that you have given in keeping us well within the boundaries of our fiduciary responsibilities, of making sure that all the numbers added up right, that You presented us with the necessary information at each time that budget amendments were required throughout your tenure. And we wish you all of the best and Godspeed as you enter in retirement. I hope that it is exactly what you wish it to be. And we wish you all the best and we thank you so very much. And if other members of the board would like to make any comments to Ms. Evans at this point in time, please feel free to do so.
Ms. Evans?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Barnes?
I have known Ms. Evans for quite a long time when I worked in Human Resource Services, and she has always been an expert in her field. And I just want to personally thank her for many, many times she helped me when I worked as ILP coordinator with mentoring benefits. And there was never a time I went to her, even at last hour, asking for something that she was not able to help me, and I will truly miss her.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Breen?
I just want to say thank you for your service, and like Dr. Mills said, we appreciate you coming back and volunteering your time to work on the budget in the coming future.
Thank you.
I'm sure Mr. Stanley would
Oh, yeah.
not chase you away.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer?
I too want to express my appreciation to Ms. Evans and the great work and guidance she's given us financially, but particularly for the notes she left me for the Administrative Services Committee meetings. It always helped me get through the explanation of the amendments. And, but also I want her to make sure that she leaves her phone number with Mr. Stanley.
He has it.
All right.
Best of luck. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell?
I also want to clock in on this and say thank you for all the work that you've done. And there's a song, May the Work I've Done Speak for Me. And definitely the work has spoken for you. We really appreciate everything you've done for Wilson County Schools.
Thank you, ma'am.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Farmer?
I too want to thank you for keeping us out of jail.
I don't know if Mr. Stanley is tuned into this call, but Mr. Stanley, I know you've done an outstanding job for us in the past, but you're following Ms. Evans. Now you've got to fill her shoes, but we know that you're up to the task, and we welcome you back to the system at this point in time. Any other? You're welcome. Oh, you are there. You're so welcome. Any
We're
other?
always together.
Oh, yeah, okay, all right. Very good. Ms.
Madam
Boyer?
Chair?
Yes.
I was gonna say, we know that those awards have been coming in every year for your financial expertise, and we appreciate the recognition you brought to Wilson County, as well as we don't look good in orange.
Definitely not. All right, well, thank you so very much. And if there is nothing else and no other accolades and kudos to give Ms. Evans, then we will move forward to the next item on the agenda, which is something that I think everybody has been waiting for. It's an action item. It's the Wilson County Schools 2021 Reentry Plan. Whose hand is Dr. Wilson? Are you
Well, we're going to tag team
shepherding
this.
this?
Here we go.
Okay.
Dr. Mills is going to project it.
So this is going to be on the screen
Yes,
for
ma'am.
everybody. So if we give us a couple of seconds for that to be facilitated.
While he is pulling that up, I will have to say that the document that we share with you today is a culmination of lots of hours, but also a lot of people had input into this document. It may only seem like a few pages, but there are a lot of a diverse team who provided input into it.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think as you introduce this, we have other participants who have joined the call.
Yeah,
Teresa Ellen, who is the Director for the Department of Health. Are there others who are on the line in regard to?
we
This
have some,
particular-
well, not anyone else from the outside of Wilson County Schools, but we do have several district leaders who participated,
Okay.
and the principals were also invited to participate today
Okay,
because they were a part of this discussion. We had assistant principals, we had teachers to be a part of that as well.
Ms. Ellen, we thank you for joining us today, and we thank you for the assistance and the working relationship that we have with your services that are offered in the Wilson County Schools. Thank you for joining us.
Hold on.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for having me this evening. I'm glad to be here and to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. Ms. Orson, do you need to assist Dr. Sherry?
This is a big document, so hold on, I got it. There we go. I'm trying to make sure I want toolbars to go.
Who are some of the other community members that assisted in the formulation of this plan?
Well, we used the DPI's guidance, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services, those two documents to help us. So that they're the ones.
Here we go. Here we go.
Thank you so much.
Had to clean some stuff up. It's pretty large. All right, let me get this out of the way. Madam Chair, board members, Dr. Wilson and her team and others, they're in the room today, can plug in as we go through the plan. But as we started this process through the spring and the summer, you know, we focused on guidance from the Department of Health and Human Services, and then the Department of Public Instruction has provided the Lighting Our Way Forward document. That's been a part of the framework as well. And there's been some other strong schools, public toolkits and pieces and parts from DHHS and others. So what we try to do is create a living document to work off of. And what we wanted to do today was walk you through the pieces and parts of the process so far. Again, this will be a living document. According to the governor's latest press conference and direction, you know, all along we've had option A, B, and C for schools reopening from the closure back in March. So we can talk a little bit about each of those and then what our recommendations are, and we need your input and feedback as we move forward. So again, this is one of those types of plans. There's a lot more underneath the surface of this. As we go through, we can bring up some hyperlinks. We'll show you some other documents we've used, survey data and other data sources, conversations that have taken place. But the big question people want to know is what we're thinking about doing and what direction does the school district need to take. That takes your feedback as well. So I realize that. But as we start this process, one of the things we focused on, again, it's got a message from me to start with, but the guiding principles, and I wanted Dr. Wilson to share a little bit about those as we go through. I'm going to zoom this down a little bit so we can all see on the screen a little bit better.
So part of the question that you asked, Mr. Breen, about who else participated in this, I failed to answer that we used those survey results. We read those comments from the staff and the families to help put into the information as well. So we did use those as well. And so part of that happened to be is what are the guiding principles that we stand on? As we created this plan, we needed to have some kind of something established in order for us as we began to create this plan. And the items that you see there are that we wanted to make sure we had a safe learning and working environment for everyone. We wanted to make sure we took care of the inequities that would exist through whatever the plans that we made. We wanted to make sure that we were addressing the local and the state federal standards. And in those 3 bulleted areas, whether it's in the technology and the internet connection, because we know that that could be an issue, as well as that second item under there, the culture of connectivity. And we're not really talking about internet connectivity. We're talking about the connection between people. So whatever re-entry that we have, we want to make sure that we connect and reconnect through collaboration with our students and staff and their families. We also know that we need to provide additional supports for our special populations, not only in the EC, but the EC, our English as a second language, our AIG students, our students who have 504s, so any of those special populations. We want to make sure this plan takes care as those individuals. We know that we need to have some training. We need to have communication in a timely manner with translations to make sure that it's equitable for all. And the next to the last bullet on there talks about responding in a flexible and nimble way, because things are changing just as soon, and I think all of us have seen that, just as soon as we think that we have a plan in place, then it changes. And so, as Dr. Mills said, this is a living document. So there will be some things that if information comes out differently, and the 2 documents that we have had used from DPI as well as the Health and Human Services, they have had almost daily or weekly updates that we've had to go back and make some changes into this reentry plan. And the last bullet is we recognize that these are some really difficult decisions for our families. As I said in those comments that we read from our families, is that they're really having a struggle at which way to go. What do they need to do for their students? And so we want to recognize that we need to offer educational options for our families.
One thing we wanted to share as we got going, I'm going to zoom this down just a little bit more too, is the timeline. We've done a lot of things through the spring and the summer ahead of time that we just had to manage. We've offered lots of professional development and training for our staff that they took advantage of. Our staff have been amazing, the teachers and principals and what they've done. So there's a lot of things that go into showing this timeline of spring and summer. There's a lot more to it than just the list, but we wanted to just remind you of a couple things from when we first had the closure to just the summer that we think are important to remember, some of the things we've managed and built around, because that goes into some of our planning.
And 2 of the items that we want to highlight in that spring section would be about one of the first things that we did when we learned about our school closure was making sure that our students were fed. And not only ours as in Wilson County schools, but all of Wilson County students from the ages of 1 to 18, that we wanted to make sure that they had 2 meals a day. And that started within the same day that we learned. Then by Wednesday, we were able to make that happen. And then the second to last bullet in the spring 2020 section talks about the wellness checks. We had regular wellness checks with our families as well as with our staff. And in the summer 2020, there are a few bullets that I want to make sure that, because they're all important, but the second and the third bullet talks about the learning opportunities. A lot of people are using that we're reopening. We have been open the entire time in Wilson County schools. We had learning going on in the spring, and we're continuously having learning for those who choose to do so in the summer of 2020. And so it spells out that in the second bullet that we have some digital learning activities that are available, and they are posted on our website. And then in the third bullet, we have our K-4 Jumpstart program, and we shared a little bit of information with you already on that for our extended learning for our K through 4 students. And if you have any questions about that, Ms. Lewis is on the call as well. She and I were talking this morning about the difference. I think there were about 48 teachers and then 160 some students that were participating in Wilson County. And our district level coaches have gone in and participated in some of the lessons and been observers to try to offer support for those teachers as well. And then the last three bullets that we have in that summer 2020, I think is really important because we've received money from the state and the federal government, what we call the CARES funds. And these are three items that we know that we have purchased, and there are quite a few more other things that we have on our list of whether it's the devices, additional support staff when our students are able to return, the PPE and supplies, and Ms. May is on the call as well if there are additional questions regarding the CARES funding.
With the reentry plans, you've got three main options, and option A is off the table for us right now, according to the governor, which is plan A, which is schools, facilities are open with students back in them as we know it, with some enhanced health protocols, but all students could be at school at the same time. So that one we know is off the table, according to the governor. So we have to focus on options B or C. And I think what's confusing, can be confusing, and at least when you start digging through it, is option B has layers underneath it from A through F. And I don't want to go into all those, but I do want to show the board briefly some of the layers we're talking about.
So are these part of these layers, are they the options that were included in the survey that the parents dealt with, of a half day, of every other day, of every week or whatever?
That's correct, yes.
So in plan B, which is open with some requirements for distancing and density and other health requirements, there's A through F. And again, this link, I've got to make sure you can see this share. Hold on. Let me go back to this one. There we go. All right, so I just want the board and others to understand underneath the hood of this, you can see we've gone through every option under Plan B and taken time to note the challenges and the benefits and what examples could be for these various layers under Plan B, okay? So there's a lot that goes into some of the planning for what looks very rudimentary on the surface, but is very limiting to school systems like us because of issues with transportation, school layouts, what parents and teachers want, and what the buildings can handle. So this was part of the planning process as well, as taking each one of these options for Plan B. This is just B again of the A, B, and C, and trying to see would this be feasible for us. So we've had those discussions this summer, and with folks like Teresa Ellen, folks from our maintenance staff, principals, everybody trying to weigh in saying what we can and can't do as we try and plan. Let me go back to the.
So anything that you see in the yellow part are the items that we in Wilson County Schools added to either the benefits or the challenges. This original options A through F document is in the Lighting Our Way guidebook that we received. And so then we went through every single one of those options as a part of Plan B to determine what would it look like in Wilson County Schools. And so we kept those highlighted so that you could see that there are some things that would be pertinent that we thought of specific for districts, but they were not a part of the guidebook that we received.
Okay. And that's all located here on this document we've been working off of under Plan B. And then of course, Plan C is remote learning right now. So summarizing kind of where we are, you've got the three main plans. A is 100% students are in the school. So you could have face-to-face, and even the virtual academy can still run. And we'll talk some more about that later. And then Plan B is the reduced density. And again, that could be the blended with some face-to-face on alternating weeks, remote learning. You could have face-to-face with our occupational course of study or Extend 1 students, full-time remote learning, the virtual academy, and then Plan C again, full-time remote learning or the virtual academy. So as we've gone through and planned through all this, again, remember the Plan B has those options, layers underneath it. We taken a look at those layers and tried to see what would fit for us. That was part of the conversation, so that's why we want to include them in there.
And you may see that another district may design their Plan B very differently. Districts are given the option to use A through F. And out of that option, those options, we chose to kind of go with those 4 bullets that seem to fit Wilson County Schools.
And we can talk more about these a little bit, but we want to walk you through just some of the, I think it's important for people to understand this guidance we've gotten and the toolkits and everything else. It's just not as simple as choosing a flavor off the menu and saying, we'll do that. We've had to go through each one of these things and pick them apart from the logistics of transportation, child nutrition, maintenance, what the schools can and can't hold, what our survey data is telling us, what we can manage with the instructional and resource staff that we have, and then walking through each one of those. So to get to this step is a lot more complex than just saying we're going to decide to do alternating or decide to do remote learning. So some considerations that we wanted to share with the board, which is also sharing with the public, are some of the next pieces as we get further into the planning. So you can see some of the things that I think are lost when at the state level they're talking about it's as simple as opening Plan B or choosing Plan C. There's a lot of things, and what we found through this whole process, and I think the principals would tell you this, the central office staff, folks in the community and others that helped out, is every time we would go through a planning process and come up with a good option, either some of the rules or guidelines would change that would limit what we could do, whether that was a density or a screening protocol, or we would find another issue that seemed like it'd be easy on paper, but when you try and work through it, it's almost impossible. Some of that dealt with logistics of transportation, especially for any school system, and especially for us. Those were some areas that just seemed to hang us up when you're trying to work through how do you get all our students to school safely with the protocols that we have. So we wanted to walk everyone through kind of some of the pieces and parts and some key areas before we get into the specifics of the plan. Transportation is one that I will point out again is very critical. And for school systems like us, this is one that is a barrier to many of the things we could do given our size and our demographics and our geography. I know Mr. Harvey is on the call with us, and Dr. Williams is here as well that could offer some of that. So I just ask that we kind of run through those, and Ben, if you want to just kind of walk through some of these. These are things I think that are lost at the higher level plans when it's shared on the news media's planning for the state and others, because these are the kinds of issues that really do stop you from some of the things you want to do.
Thank you, Dr. Mills. Madam Chair, members of the board, first I would like to thank Mr. Robert Harvey and his team at Transportation Services. They have ran multiple scenarios all through the spring and the summer in efforts of creating a plan. Transportation is obviously a critical part of that plan, and making sure that we get students to school safely and that we have a safe environment on the school bus as we are transporting them. Some of the transportation considerations as we were going through the planning process that I'll go over with you. And Mr. Harvey is on the call, and we can direct some things to him if we have some further questions other than what we have here on the slides. We have an average of 115 buses that run daily during the school year. 1/3 of the drivers are at the age that would be determined as at risk. Those are vulnerable population staff members. So therefore, being close quarters on a bus, those are obviously staff members that would potentially not be on our bus at the time of entry. 23 drivers have informed transportation that their intent was not to return due to the pandemic and doctor's order. So encapsulated within that group of at-risk staff members would be approximately 23 of those drivers who have indicated that they would not be in a position to be able to drive or return to the bus. The buses have reduced capacity, and that capacity is 24 persons maximum, which is 1 person per seat on the bus, but the driver is also included within that 24 person maximum. So additional buses would be required to transport students, also additional routes for each run. One of the things that Mr. Harvey and I spoke about today would be the need to not fill that capacity to 24 in the event that we had to have an area for students who came onto the bus and were screened and were unable to return to the bus site because parents were not at the bus stop. So that's another consideration to make too. So 24 is a number, but we would need to be cautious with that 24 so that we would have open seats available for students to be able to sit if needed after screening. A monitor is going to be required to help us to complete the screening process once we begin re-entry, which will be in addition to the driver. So that is additional personnel. That means that within the Plan B that would require additional school personnel, which would need to be taken out of the schools. Now, the concerning piece for that for us is that we obviously have students that are arriving at schools in the mornings that are not utilizing the bus transportation. So therefore, that staff members that would be out of the schools that would most likely be utilized for screening at the schools and also for supervision at the schools. I mentioned already we would have to have multiple routes per runs because of the number of capacity on the actual bus itself. When we do that, that's going to have some implications in terms of our drivers and their status. We have personnel who are part-time that would drive them into full-time status, which would require additional salary and benefits because of the amount of time that would be needed to run additional routes. We would also have to increase our fuel cost from approximately $16,000 per week, is what it was approximate fuel cost for this past school year, which would go to near $30,000 per week because of the need for multiple runs on the buses. That also brings into account the issue of refueling trucks and the number of refueling trucks that we have. That would put a strain on our refuelers as they're going out to refuel in between routes. With the number of refueling trucks that we currently have as we run multiple routes for each run. Buses needed to be cleaned and sanitized in between our routes. So there again, we would need additional staff and supplies to do that. We do have PPE supplies, disinfectant supplies. Those things are listed in another slide, but the cost for those doesn't even include transportation. That's the transportation at state level does not pay for that. That would come from the supplies that we have that Mr. Letchford and his team currently have in the warehouse. So we would have to work with Mr. Harvey, myself, and Mr. Letchworth to accommodate what would be needed on the bus. And each driver and monitor, they also have to be screened prior to starting the route. So therefore, we would also have to have a process that we put in place for that screening process before a route even began. So those were just some of the considerations that Mr. Harvey and his team have collected through their work over the spring and summer.
I think one thing that's important to note is that there's been no indication from the state level that there would be any consideration given for the efficiency rating for school districts. So even though we're having to make allowances in distancing and density for buses and the routing to allow for that would still affect our efficiency rating, which affects the amount of funding that we get, and that would have a negative effect. That's not to say it couldn't be done, but a big issue we've seen happen in looking at this is there's simply not enough buses and enough drivers and enough routing enough supervision to manage this process K-12 completely. So there would have to be, in any plan that we do, there's going to have to be some consideration given to, we cannot physically get all the students there in time for an instructional day without the route starting at such an early period of time. It's not realistic, or getting home at such a time is not realistic. So we simply do not have the manpower and or equipment to do that full tilt. I mean, on a regular day, yes, but with reduced capacity and screening and the other pieces in there, it just does not work. So we'll share some more about that as we go through, but I think that's really a key part. And we worked a lot to see if we could, again, you're talking about transportation staff going back and rerouting buses and school loads to take that into consideration. And the math just doesn't work. You cannot make the time constraints with the numbers you have. Again, we share buses between schools. So when we look K-12 at doing this, everything has a butterfly effect down the line of carrying over into the next school levels, routes, and routines. So, and we're not the only school system that does that. So these are other issues faced across the state. So that's why, regardless of the plan that we look at, there's going to be some component of it that would likely have to involve remote learning to manage because of the density requirements and the health requirements. So just keep that in mind. Again, I don't want you to think we're trying to go through everything, because we're not. These are just the highlights of things. But you need to understand why it's not as simple as just saying, we'll rotate or do this, because there's a lot of logistical pieces that just do not work for a school system. So some other considerations are the PPE and supplies, and Mr. Letchworth and his staff have been ahead of the curve and on top of that. And Mark, I don't know if you want to share some of those highlights of that real quick.
I can't see the slide. Sorry.
I was going to make it a little bit bigger for you. All right, hold on. That better?
So as far as some of the PPE supplies that we looked at and actually were able to secure some, and some were through emergency management, we're looking at the number of face coverings and evaluating, just based on our student population at last year's numbers, what that would look like. Looking at hand soap, disinfectants and wipes, and of course, naturally washing hands quite a bit more frequently now. Sanitizer and disinfectant wipes will be used quite a bit more also. And there are some approximate numbers, as you know, we're not quite sure exactly, but this is a good guesstimation based on last year, and then evaluating additional hand washing, overtime for custodial pay, just because the additional cleaning and sanitizing that would need to be done throughout the transition of the day. And also looking at just the cost of water bottles provided to students, you know, if that was an option just because of the water fountains, and looking at the total amount per year and per day, just trying to evaluate that, and looking at our total cost for the PPE. You have that in front of you. And we based that upon what we got from the CARES Act, and we estimate that our supply would approximately maintain us to mid-December. And that's approximate because that number can definitely be very fluid and change.
But the total cost for 1 year, Mark, is lower $3 million?
Yes. No, that was yeah, that's correct.
Yes. So we received nearly $4 million from the CARES Act that could be used for devices, support, and other things. So trying to manage the PPE piece with the funding that we have right now would take almost all the CARES Act, and that would leave us very little, plus getting them right now. But the setup, the maintaining piece, you know, the maintenance staff have really gotten ahead of the curve. A lot of the cleaning equipment we got before the demand ramped up when we first had the closure. But this gives you an idea of some of the planning to make sure what we would have in stock and what we would have to do. So there's protocols and all. Again, we'll share some of those in a little bit about that. And Dr. Wilson, you're probably going to want to talk about this part of the personnel aspects and some of the feedback we got.
Yeah, this is extremely important for instruction. So the principals surveyed, talked to their teachers, their instructional staff, their teachers, to see how they felt. We already had done one survey, but it was anonymous. So we knew, and we had shared that with you, we knew collectively as a district how our teachers, our certified staff felt. So then what we wanted to know is breaking it down by elementary, middle, high. And so the principals contacted each individual teacher or the administrative team to determine what was the percentage of that felt comfortable returning without students, like if they were to do remote learning at the school level, going into the classroom, and then how many would feel comfortable coming back with students. And so that's the data that we have, and it stayed very consistent through both surveys. We needed that information so that we could determine about the staffing, because let's just look at the one at the bottom, the table at the bottom. If we don't have people coming back, then our attention turned to substitutes. Mm-hmm. Like if we as a total in a district have 52% feel comfortable coming back, then how are we going to be able to staff the classrooms if they're not coming back? And again, we took answers of what the reasons why. Some varied from childcare, some varied to if they would have to take care of someone else in their family. So the answers were very diverse.
So in getting to where we are right now with the background information we've given you, the recommendation we're putting forward to the board right now is for Plan C is our start. Given the logistical issues that we have with some of the transportation and PPE, as well as the timing, plus the feedback from staffing and drivers and other folks who are going to have a lot of help from to make all this work for schools right now. Plan C is where we need to start for the school year, which is remote learning for the first 9 weeks. Again, that piece is up to the board, but you'll be looking at early colleges August 3rd through October 2nd, traditional schools August 17th through October 21st, and remote learning. And after the first 9 weeks, if conditions improve, then we could transition to Plan B, and that would be the hybrid option under Plan B. Remember I talked about A through F, which is some different pieces. I would like to ask if it's okay with the board for Ms. Ellen from the Health Department, Director of the Health Department, to kind of just share what she has seen from our data, because she's been really great to work with this whole process, and offer to sit in today to answer any questions from the board. If she'd be willing to share some of the things she has seen from the county perspective.
Mrs. Ellen?
Thank you, Dr. Mills and Madam Chair. Yes, unfortunately, we have seen a spike in our cases here in the last couple of weeks. However, our numbers from the weekend and today look a little bit more encouraging. Specifically, when you look at school-age children, we've had 91 cases between the age of 0 and 17, and 63 of those have been school-age children. The good news is that the vast majority, if not all, have either been mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic. And they've all been contacts to an adult positive, typically in the same family unit. All of our deaths have been over the age of 60, with the exception of one person who was in her 50s. And most of those actually have been in their 70s and 80s, and all have had underlying health conditions. While our numbers are high at 1122 for total positives, 83% of those are estimated or assumed recovered at this time, and we have 161 total active cases, or 14% of our total numbers. When you break our numbers down by race, African Americans make up 37% of our total positives, 3% have been Caucasian, and 36% in our Latinx community. And the remaining have been either Middle Eastern descent or American Indian. 59% are female and 41% are male. So that kind of sums up what our statistics look like here in Wilson County currently. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have specific to how the schools might operate.
Are you ready for some questions at this point, or you want to go ahead with the presentation?
We can answer any questions now and move through the various pieces. And what we've got next to share is kind of, let me minimize this just a little. Talk a little bit about the safe environments piece, access, support, communication, and then the various pieces of our choice. And so it might be good if you want to ask a few questions. If we think it's going to lead towards these different parts, we can go through the rest of the slides and do that. It's fine with us either way you want to do it.
Okay, I really have not thought as to how it's going to play into this, but as the presentations were being made, there were a list of questions that
Sure.
I had. One of the things you spoke about lately was the subs. Did we provide any training to them regarding technology and how in a virtual learning environment are subs utilized, or are they even utilized?
So all of our subs have the option to participate in our professional developments that we offer in Wilson County Schools. I'm not aware of any that took the opportunity. There may have been some in that spring when we were doing all the different professional development, because some of those, we had 150 at one time on some of the virtual professional development webinars. So there could have been some subs in there, but we did not specifically target any subs for that.
Well, I think you would have to do so if you look at your personnel certified diagram that said that 52% in elementary, 44 in middle, 58 in high. So an overall total of 52% are comfortable, but that means that there's 40+% that's not comfortable.
Right.
So therefore, you have to go into an issue of subs, and I think we need to address some issues around the subs in that regard.
You're right. They, in the spring, when we were into the remote learning, we did not have subs that would be for a day or two that were working with the students. Certainly there were some that when we had long-term, like for someone might be out on maternity leave, and when they're long-term,
Yes.
They did participate in the remote learning because of that status. But if a teacher was unable to work with their students on a specific one day, we did not have a sub to go into that position. I think that was the other question you would ask.
Okay. If students choose a virtual academy option, can they change and participate in a hybrid option if we move to that?
We can go through that as we go through, yes, ma'am.
And if we go to Plan C, how would we utilize bus drivers? I know that when we went into remote learning in the spring, and we used some of them for food distribution and the like. And so that's a concern, how bus drivers would be used. And with 23 of our bus drivers under doctor's orders not to return, would we even have enough drivers when you're talking about multiple routes and all of that? Would we be able to even man our buses to provide
So
transportation.
that's one of the reasons why right now in the Plan B, when we get to that point, when we talk through what our options are for Plan B, we can share some of the ideas we have to manage the fact that we would be down drivers and not have enough those routes themselves, even if we had the drivers, are not feasible to ask students to enter buses at the times we would have to be doing them. So in our Plan B that we'll share with you and go through the specifics of, it'll show why we're recommending some of the options that we are, because it just physically won't work.
Right. And for the numbers of students who participate in virtual, then that cuts down possibly on the number of students who might be in need of bus transportation. But on the survey, it also asks if parents, I believe, were willing to transport.
Right.
So do we have a guesstimated number of between virtual and parent providing transportation, how that impacts our need for bus drivers and routes and the like?
So we did have a good number who requested either they were likely to choose Virtual Academy or very likely. And that was on that survey that we shared, I think, last Monday. But another question on the survey, do you plan to ride the bus? And we had it broken down into K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, just because if we needed that information, in Plan B to work with a certain group of students that would have the opportunity to come to school, we wanted to know that. So in the grade span of K2, we had 185 parents who said that they were, yes, interested in riding the bus. In 3 through 5, 277 of our families. In grades 6 through 8, 432. And in grades 9 through 12, 519. They were interested in their students riding the bus. We did have another group that said unsure and then definitely no.
One thing during the remote period, as we start the year out, if the board supported that, is that will allow us to have some conversation with parents directly to ask about this. There's one thing to get a survey result that says something, because again, you've only got a portion that responded to the survey. Although I would tell you our survey results, the response rate was very good.
Yes.
Compared to some other places. I was very proud of our folks for taking the time to do that with everything that's going on. But I think it's important for us to touch base with everyone and ask directly and compare that with our rosters that have ridden the buses, so we'll know, because that will affect the logistics and the questions we would have about return to school and transportation, which is really critical for every school system.
Okay, I have just two more questions. One is directed toward Mr. Letchworth. When you're talking about the PPEs and the equipment, do we have enough, would we have enough thermometers for all of our buses, as well as at the entry points of the schools? Yes, the students who ride the buses would not be having to be retested with temperature according to what's in the plan. But do we have enough thermometers so that, and how many entry points would there be so that wherever people are coming in, do we have enough thermometers for all of our schools as well as all of our buses and in the multiples that we?
Currently on.
That's good to know. And Ms. Ellen, we thank you for the information you're providing. Part of that change and that influx and the numbers going up, going down, staying the same, what kind of consideration time-wise would you need, Dr. Mills, to be able to determine if we stay in Plan C at the end of that prescribed period that we're talking about at that first grading?
I think that's conversations with Miss Ellen and her staff and looking at numbers, but also what the governor's office says during this time period. We've got no direction to say what will happen or not happen for decisions regarding schools at this point. They could come back and put everyone on Plan C and remote. We still have no directional guidance about athletics at this point as well. We've heard some things, and that's been part of the conversations. I don't think anyone really knows what the pieces and parts of that are. However, based on the feedback we've got from our own staff and our own families and where we are, and this does give us some time to do some more questioning and asking about transportation and logistics to have protocols put in place. There's going to be some training that takes place for our staff, regardless. I mean, and you cannot do that in a week's time when people are already nervous about what they can and can't do, what they should and shouldn't do. And our teachers are phenomenal. They will do anything we ask them to do. They have. And they'll find a way. They've already done that. But to think that in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, we can have all that done where everyone's comfortable and parents will be comfortable, teachers will be comfortable to do that, that's a lot to ask in a little bit of time with a lot of unknowns. So my concern is I think we need to go slow to go fast on this and bring our people along and show what we've got in place so that everyone can feel comfortable about it, which means, we need time to lay everything out. It's late July, and we've gotten guidance just now to say you can go B or C. And some may say, well, you've had all summer to plan. We've been planning. We've been doing the work. But to really bring folks in and have them go through these protocols and go through these guidelines, which have changed as fast as Friday. The guidelines that were up there today, they changed again, which is another frustrating thing for parents and for us is I would certainly like to have told everyone early on what we were going to do. But had we done that, we'd probably be changing it like many systems around us have had 3 or 4 public meetings to do so. And people cannot plan and families can't plan like that. It's just not fair. So I really feel like there are some things we need to do to be the educators and the protectors of our staff and our students and our families and our community regarding what can and can't happen with the tools that we have. And that's going to take some time. Again, it's not due to any lack of planning. It's just due to the sheer scale of this. We've got 26 schools, lots of students, lots of teachers. And again, our folks will do anything we ask them to. They're awesome. And they will find a way, and they have. But we have got to lay it out and go step by step so that everyone feels comfortable. And I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that's what I would want if it was my family or my daughter teaching, and it's what we need to do. So that takes a little bit. And July 20th through August 3rd for early college. All right, so that one's a little bit different, but August 10th, 11th for teachers come back rather. That's pretty quick. So I really think we need to take our time and lay this out and see what the numbers say. I know the health department shared with us that, we've seen this nationally, the numbers spike after holidays, about 2 weeks afterwards. So we've got, Labor Day coming up again. There's a spike there right as we're coming back into school. People are traveling, doing things. And I don't think we know enough about some of the impacts on children because they've been kept apart, because schools have been closed. So there's a lot of unknowns for us, and we're educators. We're not healthcare professionals. We're going through this process with guidance from others. So I think there's a lot of things here, and you can see some of that in our planning. We go through these next several slides of what we're doing with protocols in classrooms, on buses, child nutrition, and then the instructional pieces. So I would encourage the board to we can walk through the rest of this and talk about some of those issues. But the timing of it, what the board really needs to decide is, are you comfortable with starting remotely? And then at some time period, and really that's arbitrary to me. We just need enough time to do the contacts that we need to do and do the training we need to do. It could be earlier than 9 weeks. That's just a stopping point. That is what many school systems have done. But that's the feedback that we need. And part of this is your feedback from the conversations you've had in the community and elsewhere. And the newspaper's done a great job of sharing information. Drew and his questions and articles have helped a lot. But it's changing all the time. So I really have a hard time answering everything because we know what we know right now.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Barnes?
I have a comment and a question, and this is based upon Mr. Letchworth's estimations that he's done. And he did say with our current funding through the CARES Act, we estimate that our supplies will only be maintained until approximately mid-December. I guess, Dr. Mills, has anything been mentioned about any additional funding that could be coming down the tubes?
I saw something nationally, there was some conversation about it. The legislature at the state has gone home for now. They're not due back until September. And so I've not heard anything about additional funds. And, you know, we've been very strategic about what we're using our CARES funds for. So it includes instructional applications with device and device support, as well as the PPE equipment. And we're in the same boat as the other school systems, just trying to plan. You know, there's been questions all along, and Mr. McPherson may offer some about some of the guidelines with the federal funds and what we can and can't do with them from the Title I side, as well as its impact on the CARES side. So, you know, the thing we found is that we've had to go very slow and be very careful about every aspect so that we do not overcommit for something that we have to pay back, but it's used for the right purposes. That's never been the issue. The issue is what we're allowed to do. And again, the rules have changed from the time we received the funds to when we allocate them to something, that we've already had conversations to be forthright about things, and they've come back and the guidance has changed. Is that right, Mr. McPherson?
Absolutely. I couldn't. Board, can you hear me just fine?
Yes.
Mrs. Barnes, one of the things that has frustrated education leaders and folks trying to help education leaders like myself is the U.S. Department of Education has continuously changed the rules since Congress passed the CARES Act. So the use of your Act money was intended to be used for and distributed pursuant to Title I. And so Title I is something that most school folks are very comfortable using, and it's a very easy federal framework to follow. Well, since then, the Federal Department of Education has interpreted the instructions from Congress 3 different ways, and basically given levers and pulleys, and I think it's probably the most accurate way to describe it, the 3 options they have given school districts on how to use those CARES Act funds, including sharing those with non-public schools. Not that that's not a normal thing, because it is. I mean, if a non-public school wishes to receive a portion of Title I money, it is a possibility for them as long as they demonstrate they have Title I students. But under recent guidance from the Secretary of Education, there has been conflict, should you say, between her interpretation and the law, which has led to several statutes sort of being in conflict from different states, and has also led to several lawsuits. One of which the Attorney General for the state of North Carolina is intervening in on behalf of North Carolina because of what he perceives as a misunderstanding and an outright refusal to follow the federal law. So to say this is an ever-changing field is an understatement. I have to commend your administration and staff for staying up on it, to be honest with you, because like Dr. Mills says, it changes every single day. So we're just waking up every day, seeing what new guidance has been put out and how it's changed the plans we're trying to make and how we're trying to help folks. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but that's the way it works.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Boyette?
I have a comment and a question for Ms. Ellen. I was able to view the North Carolina School Boards Association's town hall today at 2 with the Department of Health and Human Services. And the state health director, Dr. Betsy Tilson, was saying that she had added bullets into her PowerPoint. One of them was about the ages 0 to 10, the contact tracings, which usually were in home settings, had shown that that group 0 to age 10 were most very unlikely to be transfer the virus, whereas adolescents and high schoolers were as almost as likely as adults. And with that in mind, she was also speaking about the daycares that have reopened, not having issues there. Ms. Ellen, is that the same thing that we have seen here in Wilson County with daycares that have either remained opened or reopened?
Yes, ma'am. We have had some cases in our daycares, but we have not had any outbreaks or clusters in our daycares. And yes, I support that recent data that shows that they're not seeing as much transmission in 0 to 10. As I stated from our local numbers, most of our transmission in children has been from an adult positive in the same family unit.
Thank you. And with that in mind, I understand I would like to hear more. I feel very urgently that we need to look at getting our kindergarten through second, I really like third grade students back in school 5 days a week. And looking at the survey data, if 50% of the parents did not want them back in school, then they would have the option of remote. But then those that would be interested, bringing those K-3 students back, we would be able to spread them out in the schools, on the buses. It wouldn't be as big of an issue because we don't have 4th and 5th graders. But I'd like to hear the administration address at some point this issue. If it couldn't be done by August the 17th, then as quickly as possible. I know you'll get to the parent registration letters that each parent will need to fill out on each child, telling exactly what they want to opt for and whether they need bus transportation. But I really would, I feel very strongly that that there's an urgency to get that youngest group back into the school setting as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just have a quick question for Mr. Letchworth.
All right, Mr. Breen.
Mr. Letchworth, the projections that you talked about a couple slides ago, are those based on us coming back at a Plan A full tilt capacity?
That was based on that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell?
I have a question for Ms. Ellen. I know that there's about 161, she said, active cases in Wilson and over age 60 deaths. Do you know how many of those cases were symptomatic? I can't always say the word, but how many were actually asymptomatic or not? Because that's a concern I have.
That's a good question. I can't tell you specific number, but I can tell you the vast majority of our cases have been mildly symptomatic to asymptomatic.
Okay. And I have a question for Mr. Williams, Dr. Williams, excuse me, dealing with the buses. I know on the EC buses, we have monitors that are up there to actually assist with the students with exceptionality. So when you say we need monitors to actually check temperatures, will that be an extra monitor on the bus, or will that monitor that's already on that bus, will they do that as well?
Yes, ma'am. Is that specifically just on the EC buses? An
Yes.
additional one? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Harvey, I know you're on all if you can you give us it's the capacity as well?
Yes. The EC monitor will also be able to assist with screening.
Because I know that some of the EC monitors work with the students in the classrooms also.
Well, to that point, we're not sure how that will work just because of EC compliance issues.
May I ask a question, Ms. Ellen? When we hear news reports and they talk about the multi-generational households, actually, when we look at our population, all of our households are multi-generational. You've got, the student, you've got the parent. Some have more extensive with going up to grandparents. So how does this, particularly with possibility of asymptomatic individuals, and our concern is our students, but our concern is also the families. What's the likelihood for the transmission factor in those multi-generational households, which are all of our households?
Yes, ma'am, that's a great question. And that is something we've seen a lot of is whole family units testing positive. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so that kind of impacts and makes us have to look at narrowing in our focus, because even if the student has limited contractual issues for themselves, there is that possibility of them taking those symptoms home to those generations. Correct?
That is correct.
And the same works with our staff as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chairman.
Mr. Farmer, thank you for being
over there. A couple of questions here
because
and a couple of comments. I too was very interested in the data that Mrs. Boyette shared, and there's very little data on children on mass taking, but in South Korea, they did a study of children, and 85,000 children went on record, and they did the contact tracing and so forth and so on. And they said from 0 to 10, there was very little of the transfer from an asymptomatic situation, but from 10 on, that's when you had the greatest chance of a transfer from an asymptomatic individual, and you had to treat anyone from 10 years old or 11 years old and up as an adult. That's from South Korea. The other thing I wanted to say, being very knowledgeable about buses, I wanted to ask the question because it was a little bit nebulous. Are we talking about bus monitors now on every bus, not just EC buses? Because honestly, we as drivers, we were told, you do not turn around, you do not police, you do not do anything but drive. And if you had a situation erupt, you would pull over. I don't know how a driver, as tough a job as that is, can do anything but drive. So if you have to have a monitor on each one of the buses to help with screening and to make sure the little ones don't go and sit with one another, are we going to be able to get money from the CARES Act for that? Are we going to pull people out of the classes to go on these routes to and after school? And then if you run double routes, how is that even possible? Because they're going to have responsibility in the classrooms. The other thing I had was this new phenomenon now called micro schools or pandemic pods. And I know they're set up basically for parents that don't want their children to go to school, therefore they hire their own teacher. Well, I'm not thinking like that, but since we don't have a whole lot of teachers that want to come back and it's 50-50, is it not something we need to look at where the classroom stays the same of 20 kids, and we have the master teacher rotating out, and the substitute teacher maybe follow up with what the master teacher has taught as the master teacher rotates around. The other thing is, I ran a resource room for 7 years, and you could do that in a Plan B situation with parents who had special needs kids. They could be brought to the school, and I know at Elm City Middle School, I was responsible for 30 kids, and I was highly qualified in many of the disabilities. Therefore, I could handle most of the situations other than speech and maybe physical therapy. So that's another thing maybe we need to look at. And also, I was required, if I had a special ed student and he got in trouble and was sent home and or got sick, I went to the child's home, or I met them at a library or somewhere that I felt safe, and I worked with the kid to make sure his IEP goals were followed with the correct accommodations. And the last thing I feel very strongly about, and I've been keeping up with this through an HOT hotline and app which deals with public schools and athletics. It's not generated by the North Carolina High School Athletic Association, but it is accurate. Many schools now are saying that they want to shut down sports indefinitely. And I think we need, as a group, to send a letter to Q Tucker and tell them it's not fair for the West, or it's not fair for another school system to decide on their own to start early. It needs to come, and it needs to be a statewide goal. Thank you.
That's a lot. And I'm happy you're there and Mr. Breen is here today, because I won't have to call each of you the other person's name today. Thank you so much. Those are a lot of very interesting points for consideration that may some already be addressed in the remainder of the presentation. But I want to give anybody who has not had an opportunity to ask a question at this point in time, if you have one.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Mercer.
I just wanted to speak on a couple of things. One, regarding our special needs students. I had thought that with them being, in some cases, getting one-on-one attention, be it physical therapy, speech therapy, or whatever, too, that some accommodations could be made before all students are sent back to school or to some location, just as a thought. Now, I yield to all the work that's been done and the insight that Dr. Wilson, Dr. Mills, and all the other people who contributed to this, because my insight yields to that easily. Another situation, or another thing I wanted to speak to, is my initial thoughts were we needed to have some put thought into a transition from C to B and how we would handle that. But after what I've already heard, my feelings are not so much that we need to establish a plan for transition, because the ends and the middles are going to move before we get to a transition. But at least I think there's a team in place already that could attack that when the time comes. Speaking of the time, I too feel like the odds are that the trends are going to be changing daily, but not so quickly that on a day or even a week's notice, we would need to transition from one plan to the other. but I do not want to put it off any longer than we have to, as much like others. So if when we set a date like the end of the first grading period or September, I feel like that I'm along with everybody else. If the opportunity comes to transition into Plan B, we would do that at whatever time, if it's before that date, or if we revisit it at that time and go into an additional time in food. I just don't want us to set any dates that will hinder us in any way. And again, I yield to all the work that's been done and the insight that everybody has, because I'm truly thankful and impressed by it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, sir.
Madam Chair, it may help. Many of the comments and statements are things we'll cover through the different parts. And so with your permission, I'll go through the different pieces so we can talk through some of where we are. But the big one was where we need to start and where we would go from there. So in each one of these areas is in our plan, but we've talked a little bit about, in the interest of time, I'll kind of we can go through these a little bit quicker to get to some of the pieces I think you already had questions about, which the safe environments piece, we've already talked about what we would do in the front offices and the hallways and restrooms. And we've already begun working on that with some physical barriers and some directional issues that we can do to create one-way entrances to minimize exposure and limits there. So we've got some things in place for that. If you're okay with that, I'll go ahead and roll ahead.
Go ahead.
Again, with restrooms and hand sanitizer stations, barriers, and access. Classroom settings, same thing. We've talked about what that could look like in modeling some of those classrooms so that folks could be in there. And to Mr. Farmer's point, that fourth bullet, when feasible, students will stay in their assigned classroom and teachers will rotate. We've looked at doing that to minimize exposure there as well and keep groups together. Carpool issues.
Mrs. Boyette?
Yes, can I ask Dr. Mills a question about the seating?
Yes.
Okay. I've seen some of the tables for the younger kids with the plastic dividers, different. But my question is, are we mandated to have them all facing in the same direction? Would that keep us from being able to use like those little pods? I'm sure some of you may have seen them too, the plexiglass pods, several varieties.
Everybody, we've gotten about 8,000 emails a day on the latest vendors that have those things. They went in production really quick as soon as this hit. But no, I don't believe we're mandated to have them facing the same way. We could do things like what you're asking within our classrooms without those physical barriers. Does that make sense?
Okay, so we could put them all together at 2 trapezoid tables and let them, so they wouldn't all be facing the same way. And we do have other options. Is that what you're saying?
I think Dr. Wilson wants to weigh in right now.
Yes. Ms. Boyette, I'm right there in agreement with you on that. Thank you for my elementary experience. The only reason that we would need ever to do it all in the same direction, from everything I've read, is that if you need to optimize more people in a room, because once you start putting them face to face, it's going to reduce the number of students that would be allowed in the room. It might change the number. So if the capacity in the room is 15, if they were all facing in one way, then if we putting them at those kidney-shaped tables or those round tables, it might actually lower the number of students, but it might increase the learning that would happen. So that's where the balance would be.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we're not required to use those or have them facing the same. We've got flexibility in that. And again, now that may change, but that's what we got right now.
Let me give one more point that was in the School Board Association Town Hall, that it had inserted a case study today. It was 2 hairdressers that were COVID positive had served 139 clients. They didn't know they were positive, and they were wearing masks, and their clients were wearing masks. There was 0 transmission, and the health director was using that as an example, a case study of how masks do work. Okay, I'm through now.
Thank you very much.
All right, carpool. Transportation, we talked some, and these are some of the protocols that we would follow for the cleaning and sanitation of those. Again, that there would have to be a monitor on every bus. You are screened before you get on the bus. The only issue with that is if no one's there to take the child from the bus stop, we'd still have to take the child to school with us. We cannot leave students there at the bus stop. But again, that's a lot of personnel on buses that we typically don't have already, and a lot of protocol. School nutritional staff
Before you move forward
Yes,
on
ma'am.
that, on the bottom of that very last bullet says, windows shall be open during student transport to
Yes, ma'am.
increase air circulation, including in the winter, because the proposal that you're showing is remote for the first 6 weeks, and after then you go to possibly a hybrid model.
Mhm.
And if you're doing that, is that saying that even in the winter, you're gonna have those bus windows open for circulation? And we know that a lot of our students come to school ill-dressed, not prepared for the cold weather, and at least they have some buffer in the bus with windows closed. But now you're gonna have the windows open.
Mr. Williams, or Dr. Williams, is there anything else you want to add to?
No, sir. That's the latest.
These are the latest guidelines. I'm not
Yes, sir.
saying they're.
I just,
Mr. Harvey, you haven't heard any additional guidelines outside of that, have you?
No, sir. And to that point, that was a question that I asked, was that limited to summer months? And at that particular point in time, I was told no. However, the state transportation director meets every Friday, and I can imagine that some sort of update would be coming as it pertains to weather, because to me, that seems like a way for students to get sick if you have the windows rolled down and it's 30 degrees outside. And that's what we're trying to prevent. I can see that changing, but as of now, officially, this is what we've been told to go with as it pertains to air circulation.
okay, thank you so much.
I have a
Forget
question.
about the air circulation. What if it's raining?
Again, I don't think any provisions were made for weather.
Consideration.
What we were told was windows should be down until we're told otherwise. That was the suggestion from the state.
Okay.
I have a question as well. You talk about monitors. This is Ms. Barnes. Who monitors the bus driver? Because you said that between routes, they have temperature checks.
Yeah.
We started the second round. Who monitors the bus drivers?
We asked that one too, Ms. Bowman.
The monitor takes the temperature of the bus driver. The bus driver takes the temperature of
That's
the
about
monitor.
right.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
And I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Harvey.
The bus driver will be rescreened again before the afternoon route.
By whom?
School personnel. By that point, everybody will already be in school, so I would imagine the assistant principal or a designee should be able to check their temperature before they start their afternoon route to make sure it's at proper threshold.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, Dr. Mills, you want to pick up?
Same protocols we talked about for school nutritional staff And then the student meals section, that would be something we would have to do differently. Meals would be consumed in the classroom to avoid exposure and grouping in the cafeteria.
So during this first phase where we're going to look at your recommendation of remote learning for that first period of time, will the system used for meal distribution be back in place?
We can do part of what we have been doing until the summer feeding date is done. After that, according to Miss Mary Catherine and her staff, and Mary Catherine is on the Zoom meeting, she can share, but at that point, it would have to be at the school, and you would have to give an ID number to pick up a meal. We could not do multiple meals because of summer feeding. It's in the handout and in this information, but that is different. Now, again, that's something that minutes have asked about. They came up in our recent call as well about Bladen County had asked the same question. Could we not look at extending the summer feeding program guidelines, because that just makes better sense dealing with some of these issues, but that ruling has not come back yet.
Okay. Thank you.
That is in the handout. We've shared with you some of the touch points that will be cleaned on a more regular basis than typically are done, so that everyone would know what those are. And then athletics right now, there is conditioning going on. However, there's a question among other school systems that haven't started yet that if we're in a remote learning option, then should conditioning continue? There's also questions about when and where we will get any guidance from High School Athletic Association about fall sports in particular. And we've got no, as Mr. Farmer mentioned, we have no consistent guidance from the state regarding what's happening. It can vary district to district. We have tried to benchmark with those districts around us, the ones who are in our conferences, to be consistent. And there's some who have not even started conditioning. We have. We could stop that if we're remote. However, we don't know anything about the sports seasons yet and what may or may not happen. Driver's education is, we just got new guidance really last week about that. And our own folks should be commended for coming up with a great website that allow them to do the classroom portion. It's very user-friendly, and they've laid all that out. But what I think parents really going to want to know is we can do the classroom section, but we can start driving again. And so if you've got somebody who needs to be in the car to get those hours, because there was some talk of not even offering that, which I think as a parent of a child who's working on theirs, those behind the wheel hours are pretty important. I do not want to take that randomly. So not going to do it. So we can now start driving back with certain protocols in place. And we're sharing those now with our teachers that do the driver's ed for us. So they will be contacted based on age to go ahead and get that process started right now.
I have a question, Dr. Mills.
Okay, Ms. Barnes?
Concerning driver's ed, because I keep getting a call from the sweet young lady that has not had the driving portion yet, but she'll be happy that she does get an opportunity. Well, what about, and this is not us, but going to DMV, being able to go get behind the wheel and get licensed after? Are they talking about that at all?
I know they've been doing appointments for bits and pieces, but I don't know about driving tests. I can answer that honestly right now. So we've also got guidelines in place for recess, for how we'll monitor for symptoms and what will happen if and when we do have a presumptive case of COVID. So all those are in place, and we've got protocols and guidance. That's some of the things we would do some training on with all staff as well. We've also got signage as well to share and put up, but all that's coming out of some of the guidance documents we got from the state. Here's some of the signage that we would be, our print shop can put together for us and do. We've already shared some of that, so we can have that. We'll get a small group of principals that are helping us decide where to place these in the buildings. We're going kind of slow with this because if we make a lot of copies and incur that cost and then they change the guidance, then we got to pull everything down again, which some of this has changed. For instance, at one point it was wearing a mask was optional for some of the students, but now it is not. So things like that as they change. So again, we've had to be kind of flexible on that. So that gives us overview. Dr. Wilson and her staff can talk a lot about the next section, which is really some of the questions the board was asking about, the instructional pieces and the access piece. And this is what I think folks really want to know about the next several sections dealing with what we're trying to do.
So in the equitable access, you'll see that we have the title is instruction. So it covers about the technology as well as the last two bullets talk about students who may not have technology. So we did add that. We talked about at the beginning of this presentation that this is a fluid document. And so while originally we had on just this page was about technology, we've added what we would be doing for our students regarding who needed paper and pencil copies. The next page is talking about our special populations, the next two pages actually. Our EC students, 504, our EL students. And then on the second part of that, the equitable access, our AIG students, and then our students who we serve under the McKinney-Vento Act, and how we will be providing them support.
Can we slow down and talk about?
Sure
Yes.
can.
Thank you.
Which one?
Yes.
Yes. So currently, Ms. Adams, our exceptional children's executive director, is online. So if there are any questions, she may be the one who can answer those kind of questions. But we need to remember that our students with identified EC have IEPs, the individualized education plans. And currently, the guidance is that those specific plans would not be changed. Would be a contingency plan that would be added to each of those students in case of not only COVID-19, but also if there are other issues such as hurricanes or weather-related. So instead of changing the student's IEP, because the goal is still for them to come back to school, is to add an addendum of a contingency plan. And the state has not provided that document to us for us to use at this point.
So would you be able to do that without convening an IEP meeting?
Well, you may not necessarily have the IEP, but we certainly need to have conversation. We need to have collaboration with the families. The draft that Ms. McFadder has received has information on there that the parents really need to be aware of. It doesn't, while it may not be a requirement, it certainly is a best practice. And for Wilson County Schools, it would be a requirement. It may not go into like a formalized IEP meeting, but parents need to be a part of that conversation, the contingency plan. Another important part about the Exceptional Children's Program, I think it's, we have students who have several different classifications. And exceptional children's teachers are very similar in the nature of that, just like a middle school teacher is not necessarily going to teach math, science, social studies, whereas in a K-6 world, they teach all subject areas. But exceptional children's teachers are certified in specific areas, adaptive. And so each area, and because of the current guidelines from the federal government, and this has been in place for a number of years, they have to be certified in that area. You can't have an adaptive teacher over here teaching the resource teacher. I mean, it's not as simple as, like I said, in the K-6 world, they teach multiple subject areas. Being able to move teachers from one place to the next, it's not going to be just because of their certification. Any other questions about that area?
No.
We did look at, and you remember in the recommendation, we did look at, the number of students that we have in each of those categories, to see who we could actually serve.
But I just would, for Madam Chair, if you don't
Sure.
mind, because I'm sort of monitoring what's going on and what people's reaction to us is on Facebook as we go. And one of the things is that our screen's a little bit blurry, but I just want to make it abundantly clear that one of the things that we have in there is that students will participate in small group instruction based on their academic and social emotional needs. And that teachers will collaborate with gen ed teachers to ensure their students are receiving those differentiated assignments.
That's correct.
Okay.
No matter whether we are in Plan A, Plan B, or Plan C, those are components that must occur in all three plans.
Okay. Next.
Okay, so the next one, any questions about EL or the AIG or the McKinney-Vento? Those are our special populations that we identified. And then the next one was in question to what you were asking, I think, Dr. Fitch, regarding the school nutrition and how families would have to come. The last bullet talks about how they would have to come at this time to provide a lunch number. And the second from the last, where they would have to come to the school to pick up. And it would have to be the school in which they were enrolled. So if there was a family that might live closer to Toys Not, but their elementary and their high school, they would have to go to all three locations with the current guidance to pick up a meal.
I certainly hope that would change.
We would as well, but that is something that it starts on September the 1st when you ask about what would we fall under, is all through August the 31st is the last date that Ms. Talton can continue to serve under the current guidelines. August 31st is her last day. Starting on September the 1st, with the current guidelines, she will have to change over on September the 1st to what is here.
My concern is, in regards to school nutrition, is that we know that there is a pressing need for the breakfast and lunch for a lot of our students. Obviously, because we have provided it since we got out in March.
That's right.
And if a parent has a concern, and if we offer, well, even in the virtual remote learning, but if there were a virtual academy, the students who opt for a virtual academy may be a parent or a family that has transportation issues, has a high need for that meal for their students, and that without school, those students might not get a meal. I am hopeful that there are some other guidelines, and that as guidelines change, that this is one that can change, because we have such a high need for that food distribution that we have been doing. So if questions can be raised, either through the Superintendent's Association, through the School Boards Association, or any other entity, to light a fire for those who make the decisions so that can get on their radar screen, that would be much appreciated, because we have high numbers of students who go hungry. Okay. That's my soapbox right now.
All right, so let's see, got support piece.
So in the support piece, we identified the areas that we felt like that we needed to provide support, and we have that in 4 separate components. The social emotional needs, not only for our students, so we listed this as kind of the overarching, because social emotional needs we recognize need to be for our staff, our students, and our families. And then the remaining parts to this section would be divided up by staff and how we'll provide them with support, for our students and how we'll provide them with support as well. I do want to talk about at the end of that first bullet that talks about staggered enrollment, because that's a new thought maybe for some, or it may be reminiscing for others. You may remember when students entered kindergarten, we had a staggered enrollment, knowing that we took a few each day. So we are offering that if the board chooses to go with Plan B, that we would like to do a staggered enrollment for those students. During this time, it would be like an orientation. Our students have not been in the building since March the 16th. And we, when you go into that orientation and there are a whole bunch of people there, you can't really get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly are not recommending that would happen because we'd have to have our numbers low. We discussed having the idea of a virtual type orientation. While that may work the best for some families, there will be some families that need to have that face-to-face contact. They need to meet that teacher. They might need to drop off a device that they had previously that is now broken, or something, pick up textbooks if you will, at the early college. So we felt like that instead of having a flood of everybody coming at one time, or a flood of a virtual type orientation, if we staggered this out throughout that first 5 days for our students and our families, that would be the best option.
Is this regardless of whether it's virtual?
That's correct. Whether we're doing Plan B or Plan C, either one of those, we really want to make contact with our families.
And for the students who already have devices, they don't have to sign a new agreement. That device agreement carries over into this year?
We need a new signature every year.
Okay.
We are working with another company. We did not bring that to you today, but because it's under that $30,000 threshold through Scribbles, to where we'll have online type documents and online enrollment and things like that. And so they wouldn't have to come back to the school if they so chose. So then the other one is, I don't know which one you're on now. The students, you're still on the student one. I'm sorry, all I can see are words. Can't make out what they are. I'm like Mr. Letchworth back there. So anyway, the important part there is that families who want to come in, we'll make appointments for them to make sure we keep our density low. And then for families, we have a section of how we'll provide support for our families. It's important that throughout the student and the family one that we're talking about, that we will offer the paper option or packets for families who are interested in that as well. Another piece for our families and our students, our staff will be offering office hours, and we have a schedule that we have, a sample schedule that we've offered. Then the next one would be our technology support for all. Just like in the spring, we have extended the hours of our technology support and how they can get help through the technology department. And then the last item on that in that particular section is our wash clinic. Dr. Mills and I spoke with Ms. Ellen last week and very interested in opening up the wash clinic for our families, no matter what the plan is. And Forest Hills would be open as well as Beddingfield.
Are we implementing wash at Hunt this year?
We've got the building underway, the classroom conversion, and that's going well. Mr. Letchworth could give us an update about that anytime you want. But in talking with Miss Ellen last week, Dr. Wilson and I were having a conversation with her after a meeting. Given the current pandemic and the closure, I don't think that's one we would open up right now.
Okay.
In the middle of this. We've got 2 that are completely stocked and running, and that's one we would add probably in the spring semester.
Okay, what about the dental clinic?
Dental clinic is Miss Ellen was talking about that from their end of process and procedure. That might be something they would start a little bit later. That's up to them.
Okay.
All right. So from a communication standpoint, we've laid out when we will be sending the messages out on a regular basis and from how, again, still using a lot of the same tools and social media sites, trying to standardize some of the times as well. And then the communication with classrooms to the students and families.
I think that it's important to note in there about the school communication. We heard from the comments that parents had, if you have children at all 3 levels, they were getting at Sunday night at the 6 o'clock, they were getting the district, the school level, and then it could get up to 4 if they had multiple children. So based on those comments and hearing their feedback, we established certain times that the district would be providing support, giving information and communication, as well as the schools.
And then I think the crux of what we were to talk about is this last section, which is the instructional design and the choices for families to explain the different ones under our Plan B or C. So that we would understand that, Dr. Fitch and board members.
All right.
So Dr. Wilson, her staff have been key behind this. I'm gonna let her do the talking. I'll just keep us ahead on the screen. How's that?
Okay. So we recognize that our families need a choice. That's one of the guiding principles that we had. These are some difficult decisions that families have to make, and they need to have a choice. So these are the components in the design principle behind as we get ready to lay out what those choices are. So in Plan B, that is the one where we would limit the density. We can have one option in this. There's several different options in Plan B. However, this particular option, one that we're showing on the screen, is it can only be done in Plan B. It's not going to happen in Plan A because that's at 100%. It's not going to happen at Plan C because that's at the remote. This is one of those that would be like a blended, and that's what we called it, to have face-to-face and the remote learning experience. You may remember in a previous slide, we talked about the alternating weeks, and that's how this would be accomplished. So 1 week, we would have face-to-face for our students, and then the next week we would have remote learning. And again, the reason that we went with the alternating weeks is based on the survey results that we got from our families. That's the one that had the majority of the what they were interested in. I mean, certainly there were other options of alternating days, every 2 weeks, that kind of thing, but we went with the alternating weeks. And so in that first section are the features of the blended face-to-face and how we will provide the services. And then, of course, at the bottom of that would be the safety measures of the blended learning experience that we would have for our students. Are there any questions that's specific just to this plan? Or this option? However, this would not be what our current plan in Plan B, if we went back on that slide, this would not be for the high school level. So this would be available for the K-8.
This goes back to the conversations we had about the logistics and transportation with some of the options that we would have to explore and do. So under a Plan B, with the limitations that we have for drivers and staffing and routing and buses and logistics themselves, we would look at K-8 as
I should have said PK.
as a blended with the face-to-face on alternating weeks, but high schools would be remote learning. And that's how we would adjust to meet the needs of what we can and can't do with some of the equipment and supplies that we have.
So let me make that correction, that this is for the pre-K-8.
Pre-K.
Pre-K,
So under Plan 1,
the option 1.
Option 1, Plan B, is the blended face-to-face only for K-8, and the high school would be remote totally.
This first one, you'd have remote learning taking place on the alternating weeks. So this
Right.
is pre-K-8.
But at the high school level,
High
it would
school is
be
going to be, we're going to talk
remote
about.
the entire time. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, for option 2, Plans B, it would fit under Plan B and Plan C. So this is the full-time remote learning where parents, the idea behind this is that there might be some parents who don't feel comfortable with their students going in alternating weeks. And so if they don't feel comfortable, they may opt in to having remote learning. And that would mean that they would stay into remote learning, they chose to do so, until conditions change to where they feel comfortable for their students to go back to school.
So they could go back.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we have provided, thinking about an online remote learning schedule and what that would look, and this would be for pre-K 12, or our super seniors, I suppose. They're at the early college. They would be taking only community college classes. Any questions about option 2? So option 3 is a little different. And again, we took this guidance from our survey results that we had some families that were not interested in their student going alternating weeks. They were not interested in their students even participating in the remote learning experience because they had no intention of their student going back to school. So with that information, we are designing a virtual academy for our 3rd through 12th grade students. This would not be available for our K1 and 2 students because, as Ms. Boyette said, we want our K2 students in the school building as soon as possible. So this virtual academy that we are proposing would just be for 3rd through 12th grade. This would be for families who are interested in their students staying through the end of the course. And in the high school, that could be at the end of the semester. It could be, and then at the end of that semester, they could make a decision if they want to continue off because there'll be another whole set of courses they'll be taking. Or at the K-8 world, it could be for the entire year simply because they don't change a new set of courses once January rolls around.
Right.
So really, these 3 options are to meet the needs of our all of our families. And if we go back to and think about what was on one of the previous slides at the first of the presentation, you'll find the virtual academy could be done in all 3 of the plans. the full-time remote learning would be in Plan B and Plan C. And then, of course, in the Plan A and B, we're talking about students coming into school. Plan A is where they're at 100% coming to school, and Plan B is at the alternating weeks.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Boyette?
this, virtual academy is one that I see great potential for. And I also think that it's one that we ought to really, really, get out to parents so that they will be aware that this option is there in A, B, and C. I think it would significantly cut back on the number that are going to private schools or homeschooling options if they are aware that this, virtual academy is something that they can do, at no cost as part of Wilson County Public School System.
Madam Chair?
Mrs. Powell?
Yes, just to add to that, there are some teachers that are taking care of their elderly parents, and they have a concern as far as going back to school. They're aware that the virtual academy is available. I think they would feel a lot better, and it would probably make them not feel as uncomfortable coming back with having elderly parents that have to take care of it. Maybe the parents may be in the home, or they may be going to the parents' house every day, such as I do, to take care of them. So you don't want to be asymptomatic and take something there that can cause a problem. So I agree, this virtual academy, I think, would be definitely something to look at.
I would like to chime in as well, Dr. Fitch, because those are some of the calls that I've received from teachers that if we had a virtual academy, they would be very much interested in participating in that with the proper training.
All right.
So we are very interested in using our own staff as part of the teachers for that particular, for the virtual academy, that choice. We recognize that there are some other options out there that we may have to fill in some gaps. And so we do have the Edgenuity program, and then we have NCVPS to help us, particularly at our high school level, when students need particular courses that are very specialized. But our first and foremost is that we want to use our own teachers. We have written a job description of what that would look like, as well as an application for having our teachers participate.
Are they already aware there is that possibility?
No, ma'am, we wanted to share that with the board first.
Okay.
We have our iSchool program that's going on. I mean, that's what we've used in the past, but we're trying to open this up to be a little bit wider.
Bless you.
And we agree in the fact that we want this to be passed. The intent of designing this program is to make it past COVID-19. This is not a design. We may have it happening, but we don't want it to be just parents choosing the virtual academy because of, we want this to go past the 2021 school year.
Okay. So now that we have surveyed them and found out their comfort level and their discomfort level and everything else, in this remaining time between now and the 17th of August, the 3rd of August, and the 17th of August, whatever our decision is tonight, based on your recommendations, or based on our discussions, what's your timeline for getting to find out how many teachers, how many students want the virtual academy, how many, well, it's not much of a choice if we accept your recommendation to start the year off virtual, but to have that second option and that third option in place, and for the public to embrace it and move with it and get us ready to go at that point.
So no matter what your decision was going to be, we went ahead and developed a family choice reentry registration. And we already have that virtually as well as paper copy for families to go ahead and make that decision. We've not disseminated that until we heard from the board. Our plan was that as soon as the board has made some decisions this evening,
Okay.
for it to be communicated not only with our families, so we have the registration, but also our staff, so that we can begin. Our timeline to getting that information in, we were thinking a week. We did the same kind of information or request, if you will, for the surveys, and we used about a week timeline, and we touched quite a few families during that time. So, you know, we don't want it to be like an overnight decision. This is something they need to have some conversation about. They need to be able to contact school administrators, maybe district staff, to find out a little bit more information. So we want to give them time to think about it.
But this would not be anonymous as the survey was. This would be
Correct.
definitive,
That's
knowing
Right.
who's choosing to go where and what options you're putting in place.
And we need that information within that week's time so that we can determine staffing at the school level, staffing in the virtual academy. We need to have that, make transportation would know, school nutrition. I mean, those are the things, but we need to know your input, and then we'll go forward with that.
We do have a variety of frequently asked questions at the end that cover some things. This is growing all the time, are out there as well.
Is this document going to be made public?
We can put it out, we'll put it out everywhere, social media, the website.
Newspaper possibly?
Yes.
The frequently asked questions newspaper, if possible.
The newspaper's done a great job of helping us get things out and sharing information, but again, one thing we tried to do is just bring one plan with the information in it so that we would not have multiple meetings over time to have to go back and forth. But this is kind of where we are, so we really need your input about these pieces and parts to see if this is the right track and where you want to start from.
Well, I think that pages 33 through 37 are very important for the public. It is the frequently asked questions section.
Growth.
It does talk about the virtual academy as well among the frequently asked. So.
Yes.
Other questions or comments, members of the board?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this question, at the high school level, I know in March, whenever, we had to go virtual, some courses like, say, Adobe Suite, Microsoft Suite, AutoCAD, things like that could not be done virtually because they require a different type of computer. Now, I've been told by a teacher that some changes have been made to be able to offer some of those virtually. And then I've been told by another that there's still the Autodesk series like AutoCAD and some of the gaming software that still can't be done on a Chromebook. And then there are courses like, say, agriculture, mechanics, ROTC, course like that can't be done remotely. Or am I incorrect? Can you elaborate on where we are with all of the things like Adobe and Microsoft certification courses? On what are our plans for courses that don't lend themselves or can't be done virtually?
Yeah, I understand what you're asking, Ms. Boyette. And so Mr. Linden probably has the most up-to-date information about that. And he could chime in if he's still.
Yes, ma'am.
There.
Thank you. So the issues that we had in the spring with many of those courses, Ms. Boyette, was that they operated in a Microsoft platform and our students were operating with a Google product. And so they didn't mesh very well. We have been working closely with CTE directors across the state and our CTE guidance at the state level. And there is actually a web-based platform that we can access the majority of those courses on any device. So we log in even from a Chromebook and are able to utilize the Microsoft platforms through that Chromebook. So we're looking at that. The Department of Public Instruction's CTE department has been phenomenal in helping us to look at what the contracts would be to do that. And it would actually save us over a period of time quite a bit of money, because rather than replacing labs, and you can imagine what the cost of desktops are in those labs that run AutoCAD, our students would be able to continue using their Chromebooks even in those classrooms. So long range, we would actually be saving money to start looking at this. Now, you asked about some of the other classes, agriculture, auto mechanics. There's going to be some hurdles that we've got to come across there. But again, the CTE people in Raleigh are working very, very hard right now to revise our curriculum so that they could be offered in the virtual format for every course that we have. Now, it's not going to be the same as hands-on, but the curriculum and the content taught would be still beneficial for our students.
Thank you. And my follow-up comment to be would be that I would like to see us get those high school students that are going to be in, that would plan to be in those subjects. I wonder about, I've heard, I know colleges use the virtual login like you're talking about, use platform, but that still doesn't, you know, as you said, it still doesn't solve all of the ones that are all those desks or all those whatever, like the gaming ones, you can't do it that way. But I would like to see the high school courses, those students be able to go back to do some face-to-face courses. If there's any way we can do that, I would like for those, you know, that you can't be done virtually, so that we could go back to offering those face-to-face and get those certifications, because I remember in the spring, our number of certifications that students earned were way down, simply because they had no opportunity to do it because we were virtual. But that is another concern. I would like to see those high school students be able to go back to face-to-face instruction if they are in a course that can't be done virtually.
Yes, ma'am.
Did I hear Mrs. Barnes?
I was just going to comment because my son teaches aeronautics and computer engineering in the Wake County Public School System, and they are using the web-based platform, and everything is done, lesson plans virtually, and students can do virtual learning. And when they have projects such as, you know, auto mechanics, as Mrs. Boyette mentioned, they have project corners set up in the classroom so students can pick up things that's needed. In all cases, they can't do that, but it works well for him.
Okay. Other questions or comments? I'd like to thank you all for the awesome job that you have done in putting together this reentry plan. And we understand that it is indeed a moving target from day to day, week to week, hour to hour. But we do have a decision to have to make. And I think that the community is waiting. Every school system in the state has been faced with what do we do and how do we go back? And even though the governor may alter whatever plans we make at this particular point, we have the issues that we are looking at. So I think you've recommended what you would like to see us do, which is to go back in a virtual for the first grading period and then have the options available. So we have to, members of the board, act on what is going to come before us. So what is your plan and what is your decision at this point in time? Are you ready for us to now move with what they are recommending to us? And if so, we will, I will entertain a motion.
Would it be possible?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer and then Mr. Breen.
I move that we accept and support the Wilson County Schools 2021 reentry plan as presented.
Well, I'm not hearing a second right now, so I'm going to go to Mr. Breen and see what Mr. Breen is wishing to discuss.
Madam Chair, would it be possible to take a brief recess and maybe get the opportunity to have something so we can look at the three options that are presented side by side by side?
Okay. Members of the board, we're going to take a, what would you like, a 10-minute, 5-minute, 15-minute? What kind of time do you?
Maybe a 5-minute?
We're going to take a 5-minute break, if you would, please. And so I think that pages 32, 31, and 30 are giving you those three options. That's what you want, kind of side by side, Mr. Breen?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Let's take a 5-minute break to allow for those plans to be readily available. We're in 5-minute recess.
No. So we can get down here on this thing.
Dr. Mills. Dr. Mills. Dr. Mills.
Send him a chat, Velma, because I don't think he's got his microphone on, but I can hear you.
Hey,
Okay,
hey, they have my mic muted.
Okay, what I was going to tell you is a wonderful town hall is going on as we speak, and Mandy Cohen is up there, and they're asking questions about the same things we're discussing now, social distancing and that kind of thing. I wish I could hear the whole thing. And Eric Davis, I did hear him say that they were going to be they're going to hold harmless ADM.
ADM.
I don't know whether that's been talked to you all about or not.
Good. We hadn't heard that yet. That's excellent.
Well, he's on this call, and that's what he said a little while ago. So it's really an interesting call. I wish I could hear it all, but I can't. So,
Ms. Barnes, you're double dutying.
yes, I'm doing that while we got a break.
Show double. think I can make it show multiple pages.
Yeah.
What you trying to do?
Trying to do what Ron was talking about, it's not operating very well. 2-page view. You got 2, Ron. No, I don't see a 3.
Okay. Oh, what do I want to see happen?
Yeah.
I'd like to see.
Right, okay.
Where'd you get from? I got some here. I like that.
Yeah.
Are you ready, Dr. Mills?
Yeah, it's definitely. Not bad.
We have. Are the mics still live?
Sorry for getting you out of bed this morning. I got an assignment at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Hope that's not the assignment, right?
When I was at the beach, I used to have to catch boats about 4:30.
Teresa still with us. That's wonderful.
I have a question. Do I need to wait till we go back to open session to ask it? It's gonna be, it'll be related to, can we do something?
Okay.
Just a moment. Am I live now, Mrs. Harrison? Just a moment, Ms. Boyette, we heard you. My mic was in a muted situation. You have a question, you wanted to know if you ask it when we're back in open session. We're now back in open session. Everybody is back with us. Do you want to ask your question now?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Here's my question. If we bring back K through 3, 5 days a week for parents who choose that, and those others could choose remote learning, we should be able to spread those K through 3 out over a building. Now, here's the question part. When the 4th and 5th come back, if we choose for them to come back after 9 weeks at a 50%, can the schools do that? Will they physically hold the K through 3 that are there, that I'm asking that go back, and then bring 50% of the 4 5s back? Will our facilities do that? With cafeteria space, art, music, all facilities.
Are you looking for those K3 to still be in whatever spread out configuration they were in while 4 or 5 was not there?
If necessary, if we're at a 15 capacity, if we've just got 15 in a room, and we can put them in one room, we don't have to spread them out. But I'm asking, would that be possible to bring, would that be an impossible situation?
So K3 comes full-time, and then grades 4 and 5, when we add them back in, would they be able to maintain the same thing with the distancing?
Could you hear Dr. Mills?
Yes.
Okay.
But knowing that some of your K2s will still be on, some of your K3 would choose remote learning.
Yeah, it would depend on how many choose remote learning or a virtual academy and commit to it at that point. Because right now, the hard part is coming up with the planning which is one reason why we're looking at the options that we are for, say, a C to start, and then B is we don't have commitment to know what those are yet. So that's why we're looking at alternating weeks when we do come back, which is our recommendation, because you can't plan for it. So I think you can make the K3 work in a building with some distancing. We'd have to double check numbers, but you'd have to have a significant amount of folks go to remote learning and virtual academy to keep your numbers down for what would be the distancing still required, even with some of the allowances that have been made from the Health and Human Services guidelines. Just off the top of my head, Ms. Boyette, we'd have to look and do the counts. That's what makes it so difficult.
The good thing about in the K6 world is that they're certified for all subject areas. However, we're looking at the numbers of the teachers who would be coming back. So would that mirror that same population? Would there be about 50%?
And if there weren't, teachers could, like if there were ones that couldn't come back, then they could conceivably be moved to a school. They're going to be remote anyway, but be teaching children you could move your staff around to match your student needs.
Right.
Correct?
And we were thinking about that we would have, particularly in the virtual academy, students who would be assigned from different schools being with a teacher, not
Correct.
necessarily so for the virtual academy, we definitely were thinking of that.
All right, before we broke, Mr. Breen had asked if those options could be laid out side by side.
Best
Were
time to do
you
is lay
able
two
to-
screens.
Okay. So we're gonna get 2 screens and then
Best
can
thing to do
pull
is
the
lay
third
two
one?
documents out.
All right.
Which is the blended and the remote learning piece. So let me go back to my. There you go, Mr. Breen.
Thank you.
Can you enlarge just a tad, Dr.
Sure,
Mills?
I sure can. Let's bring it away. Is that better, Ms. Barnes?
Is that better, Mrs. Barnes?
She muted. There she goes.
Oh, she
She's
waved.
smiling.
Okay. All right. Yes, thumbs up. I see you.
All right.
And you didn't put up the third because that's the total remote or virtual.
Virtual.
What was the third one?
The virtual
The
academy.
virtual academy. Okay. And please remember that the virtual academy is 312.
Mhm.
So pre-K through 2 is not
Yes,
included
not
in the
part of it.
virtual.
We specifically did not include the pre-K through 2 in the virtual academy for the reason that we wanted those students to be back in the building
Yes.
as soon as possible.
Right.
That was intentional.
Okay. Putting those together, Mr. Breen, were you able to see better what it was that you needed to see at this point?
Yeah, I think that it provides a little bit more clarity when we're selecting between options and that, maybe making a buffet plate of choices if we decide to pick and switch. If we were to do something like option 2, could we still run the virtual academy?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes. The virtual academy is in all 3 of the plans.
it can run concurrent with anything. Really, the main question that the board needs to consider is how do you want to start back? The virtual academy can run through any option. So do you want to start back remote or do you want to start back with some kind of blended piece? And if you do blended, it's going to have to be something where there's some alternate between face-to-face and remote because we physically do not have the capabilities of getting everyone there in a reasonable period of time that families could appreciate because the schedules are horrible. And that's everywhere. That's every school system. So the questions you've asked about various grade level configurations and all, we've had those same conversations. And the piece is you have to commit to one and then get commitment from everyone that's going to do remote versus face-to-face or blended based on their own family situations or work situations to be able to plan to do that. And that's simply not something that's been within our purview to do and commit to it because once we do that, put that out there, then if too many people show up to school or on the buses, then we've got to plan backwards from that. So we're a little bit limited to be able to manage that from a best or worst case scenario in terms of some of those numbers. So that's the hard part of the logistics of what we've been trying to do from day one. The unknown is what makes it difficult to plan for, even when you've got some idea of what schedule will work with. That's why this time period is really helpful to us.
So in your recommendations to us, to begin remote learning for the first 9 weeks and to go with Plan B and Option F hybrid, if conditions improve. Plan 1 and Plan 2 fit into the hybrid, and either of those scenarios can be workable.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be what we would do. That is our recommendation for the reentry plan after we start remote.
Yes.
And again, the question of a grading period, it was just a logical determination, and in terms of that, that doesn't mean the board has to consider going that far into the school year. You could make it earlier if you wanted to do remote for a shorter period of time, if that's the palatable piece of the equation right now. If you want to go to the end of September, the numbers between that and a period are not that long apart. So, I mean, that was done to be contingent upon
Dr. Mills.
grades and everything else.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
You're talking about the transportation piece.
Yes,
How early of a start would you contemplate us having if we were to transport children to and from school? I know it would be double routes. How much discussion is going to have about the start?
If we had everyone going like we needed to in a blended model where we had, let me rephrase, let me get it straight because it is so confusing. If we went back to school under the guidelines that we have to operate now with the distancing on the buses and the capacity of the buses and the monitors, okay? If we tried to roll out school as we normally know it, we had routes that were starting at 3:30 a.m.
What?
And students were getting home at 9-something p.m. That was on a perfect day when everyone showed up on time and everything worked out mathematically, and we had enough drivers and monitors, and that's including enough people to manage and watch at the schools as they get there that early ahead and wait that late to go home. So that does not work.
And who would you put on the bus at 3:30?
I would not put anyone on the bus at 3:30. That's why we're not recommending that, because that makes no sense. So yes, ma'am, Ms. Barnes, that's the pieces and parts we looked at, and when we finally said it just won't work. So if we're going to have to work under 24 max on a bus, which is really less than that because you have to offset some of that, because we can't leave students at a bus stop if they had a fever and no one was there. We're not going to do that. So we bring them on to school isolated within a bus through distancing there that's already being distanced. All those things back up the decision-making process. When we looked at it, there's no way that we have enough buses and or time to do that. That's why we would have to, under the current guidelines for transportation, at least some grade levels would have to be remote for this to work. And that was our decision point, was high schools are most likely the best equipped to manage remote learning as it stands right now. And so that's why that recommendation is in front of you. We could do K-8 in some blended face-to-face and alternating weeks, and then high schools could be remote for a period of time until the restrictions are lifted for the transportation piece. And that's what we're recommending. Again, we spent a lot of time going back and forth on the logistics, and finally we just have to accept the fact this won't work.
Right.
I mean, I would never ask a parent, or nor I would want my child to be asked to go up to a bus. I feel bad about some of the bus stops that we have now on a good day with the bus routes and the amazing work our folks do to get them out there. I mean, it's still not ideal because we're not a small county and we don't have all the buses that we need all the time, no different from other school systems. So, but the time constraints we looked at don't work.
As a follow-up, Dr. Mills, those 23 bus drivers who have medical reasons for not coming in, they've gotten doctor's permission.
Yes, ma'am.
Does that mean for the remaining, for this school year, or is it just during a certain period of time?
I think it would be for the period of time. because otherwise they would be allowed to drive at all.
Right. That was my question, I guess. Or
Yes,
will they be
ma'am.
driving?
That would come out of our available pool of drivers.
Madam Chair, just thinking out loud and not by way of any kind of motion. I would like to see option 2, with K3 back in the school building day 1.
Yeah, so you're looking at option 2, plan B and C.
Yeah, so parents have the ability to opt into, and it allows for the transition. I believe all the plans allow for transition, but I believe it gives families enough flexibility to make choices as things progress easier.
So are you looking at the remote learning option of plan C? Or you're looking at B and C together, which would still allow for the remote learning at the beginning, but you want pre-K 3 back in the classroom on day 1?
Yes, ma'am. I think we can do that with our classroom densities and not put an undue burden on our transportation.
Building on that, if we say K-3, day 1, 4 through 12, remote learning for the first 9 weeks. And then at that time, go with the staggered weeks at 4-8, or do we have them? I mean, I would like to say 4-5, and then 6-8, 9-12. Make that decision after the first 9 weeks, knowing that everybody has the virtual. Everyone that was in that's not back at school has the virtual academy choice, or the remote learning with the hopes of going back after 9 weeks. But still, in all that, I would like for there to be accommodations so that EC students could get face-to-face instruction at the school if that was in their best interest, or that we would have computers available at the high schools that students could use to take courses that they can't do virtually. I want it all.
Yeah. I was gonna say, don't, Beverly, I'll have whatever you're snacking on, because I need some of that brain food.
Dr. Fitz, can I give you some numbers for the board to consider?
Yes, who's
Yes.
speaking?
This is Scott Sage.
Okay, Mr. Sage.
Just for K3, we have 146 classrooms. And we only have 114 teachers K5 that said they would feel comfortable in the classroom. I'm with Ms. Boyette. We wanted to bring back as many as we could. And that was another factor when we looked at the employees, the teachers that were comfortable being in a classroom when the students return.
K3, you have 146 classrooms, but you only have 115 teachers for K5?
Yes.
Didn't indicate they'd come back.
Right.
Mr. Sage, would you entertain a question?
Sure.
So the 146 classrooms, for clarity's sake, is that all K3 or is that, a portion that indicated they would come back? I mean, what's,
Yeah, when our principals asked the teachers, would they be comfortable returning, that 146, that's the number of K3 teachers that we have right now, the classrooms. And then when we looked at the number of teachers that said yes, they would feel comfortable coming back, just in K5 alone, there was 114. So even if we move some 4th and 5th grade teachers to the K3 level, that still leave us understaffed.
Right.
And
But still, you're not gonna have all of your K3 parents choose to send their children back.
Right, that's true. You're not gonna have 100% that are coming back.
But that also doesn't take into account the social distancing within the classroom space. That's not a one-to-one match anymore.
what I'm just trying to figure out is what that 146 stands for.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the number of K3 classrooms.
From last school year?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, based on the numbers of kids coming 2021.
Okay.
Well, then, we need the numbers, that we need commitments. If we added if we, sent the information out, couldn't we get commitments and look at our numbers? I mean, like Mr. Farmer made the suggestion about a master teacher and a substitute teacher, or bringing back a retired teacher, to fill in there. I think we need, I mean, I understand and appreciate, so don't take this as an insult, but I think our focus needs to be on our students first. And, that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, we had a question raised at our last meeting about ADM and funding. So when you start talking about a master teacher and then bringing in all of these substitutes, do we have the financial capability? And we don't even know how we're being funded at this point, if I'm not mistaken. And I know in the governor's press conference where he indicated his preference, Drew piggybacked from our board meeting and raised the question at that conference, which was a question that I think that school systems around the state were asking as to how we're being funded and what's the ADM and that whole calculation. So I think there's a lot of other at play with what Mrs. Boyette is asking for, because then you've got your regular number of teachers and then you want the substitutes to kind of fill in while that master teacher circulates around. And so that's more staffing than we may be able to really handle in terms of funding.
And Dr. Mills, again, I'll ask the question, if we were to decide on the pre-K-8 plan, does that still mean that students would have to board that bus early in the morning, as early as 3 a.m. in order to get our K-3 back into the classroom?
I hope not.
And let me make sure I'm answering the right question.
Okay.
So you're saying if we have students in school K3.
Yes.
And then we also have alternating weeks for the rest of the grades, 4-8?
Yes.
I don't know that I could answer all that just off the top of my head without any accuracy. The one thing I do want to caution everyone on is, and I don't mean disrespect by this, but we spent a month or 2 months looking at numbers and looking at options and looking at various scenarios. And it's very easy to lay some things out, but without having some data in front of you, it doesn't mean it's going to work. So I know we've got some good ideas on the table and we can go back and do some things, but we've looked through about every scenario or some variation thereof, and we keep getting tripped up on one part of it, from whether it's transportation or what staffing indicates it can hold, or what the guidance is from DHHS about distancing. And, you know, we've gone through the same iterations in our own meetings of we start here and we end up somewhere else and we go back up. So I fear we're getting a little bit loose around what we want to see. So what I would like to hear is, what do y'all want to know, so that we can, if it's not what we recommended today, that's fine. I just need to know what it is you want us to go back, because we will not be able to answer that in this meeting tonight. I'm just telling you that is not how we need to do it, because there's too many moving parts, and we need to go back and lay that out so that everyone will get this right stuff. And we're glad to do that. And we can do it based on what we got. Some of it won't come until we go make contact with folks, like what we're talking about with some of the K-3. And we talked about doing some of that. The only problem is we didn't know which direction we can go in. That's why you need to provide that feedback. So you brought up some really good points, and it's things we kicked around. But if that's kind of the leaning of the board, then tell us and we can go back and have those conversations. Just getting into the retiree things or substitute. A lot of those folks are of an age that would be at an at-risk category.
Right.
So then that's an issue. Then we have social distancing. Every time we try to find a doorway, we keep getting the door shut in our face to lay things out. So I agree with you. We started off wanting pre-K to grades 2 in the buildings every day, as well as our students with disabilities. And we tried to work from that and kept running into logistics. And then we looked at alternating weeks. We've been through a lot of iterations, and we all want the same thing. But for us to go back in the time frame, we've still got time to react and do these things. We do. But we need to know kind of what your thinking is based on what you've seen today and the conversations we've had over the last month or so and what guidance we've got. So, because what I'm hearing you say is we want to go from kindergarten to 3rd grade, face-to-face every day, as well as some of our EC students. And then others would be remote for a while until we know what the numbers are for online learning or virtual academy. And I've heard some variation of that. So we just need some direction so we can go back. But I would be lying to you if I told you we could answer some of those tonight. We couldn't. Not with the accuracy that you need.
Well, I hear you saying K through, but I heard Dr. Wilson saying pre-K. So, because on one of these charts, pre was missing. So on choice option 1, plan B, she added that what was missing was pre-K. And I assume it was the same thing with option 2, plan BC. So it's not really just K-8. It's in there inclusive of those preschool, those pre-kindergarten students as well in the numbers.
And I will go ahead and say we do need guidance today to say what's going to happen for early colleges, because they do start the 3rd. And so part of that conversation was they would have started in remote learning, which is typically what the many online the colleges are doing across the country anyway, from a secondary standpoint.
Well, since many of the board members have weighed in as to what they want, we heard Mrs. Boyette. Mrs. Boyette wants the whole
She said she wanted it all.
back. Yeah, she wants it all. Mr. Breen has indicated what he wants. I think with the work that has been done, the recommendation of Plan C, and after 9 weeks, move into Plan B with an option F hybrid is workable, because it allows for face-to-face with the alternating, and also deals with the EC and the ELs with the extend and whatever else. So I think that you came up with the best of plans for what it is that we're facing of the unknown, to at least allow us to start with a remote learning situation to begin with. And then that helps to give us time to get out the surveys, to get the acknowledgement, to get the buy-ins from families as to how they want to go. And then if we can alter that, then fine. So did anybody else want to weigh in on their thoughts, or where do we go from here?
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Farmer?
I agree with you. They have done all the work and they've put it out there, and we know what they're gonna do works right now. I also agree with Ms. Boyette. Every day is precious with the youngest of minds. But can we afford 9 weeks? I don't know that. If we can, let's go with what they have presented with the parent choices and the virtual academy, and make that decision now with them time to fill in with other ideas. And there may be some ideas out there that we even didn't bring up tonight.
Mrs. Powell, did you weigh in as to what your thoughts, and are you ready for anything at this point?
Yes, I was sitting here looking at when he said we have 146 classrooms with only 114 teachers. We're not going to have enough, and with the funding, we're not sure about that. Trying to hire substitutes, that's another problem, because we've had people in the past complain about having substitutes in classrooms and not having qualified teachers. So we're kind of setting ourselves up with something with the K-3. Looking at the remote learning and having then just having them feel comfortable, and then things change as we progressively, slowly move back into the classroom. That sounds like a good idea, not rushing. Because I don't want us to, the grass doesn't always look green on the other side, as sometimes we think about, we want the kids back in school like right now. Sometimes we have to be a little patient and make sure everything is set up the way it should be before we do that. We don't want to jump into something that's going to cause us more of a headache, even though I agree with getting the kids back in classroom, and there are EC students that do better educationally with one-on-one, and there are some that actually do well with computers. So, we have a variety of students in that population, depending on what their learning needs are. But I'm thinking, just taking it slow with the remote learning, and then as we get more comfortable to go back into the classrooms. And I know we have to make a decision now because early college is going to start soon. So everything that's been said makes sense. It really does. And this is it's a tough situation for us to have to weigh in on and decide, because we do want what's best for our students and their safety. And no matter what decision we make, we're still going to have people that's not going to be happy. Mm-hmm. But we have to look at what the paperwork looks like, and look at our funding and what's best for the students. And I'm thinking that remote learning and plan was option 2. I was looking at that. And then, of course, with the virtual academy as an option for those parents and teachers that rather feel comfortable doing that instead. So that's my way in right now.
All right. Who did I miss? I know that Mr. Mercer had originally made a motion that didn't get a second, and he was weighing in on the recommendation. Did I know Ms. Boyette, Mr. Mercer, Mr. Breen, I know what you want, Ms. Barnes. So we heard from everybody. So what's your pleasure? Well, Mr. Vice Chair, I'm going to turn it over to you, because I'm going to make the motion that we go with the recommendation presented by the administration to begin with Plan C, remote learning for the first 9 weeks, and after the first 9 weeks, if conditions approved, go to Plan B, which would allow for the hybrid option.
Okay, Madam Chair. Do we have a second?
Just for the sake of clarity, because I want to understand the motion that's being presented. The option F, are you recommending exactly what's on page 8 of the document? Or are we selecting an option 1 through 3?
Well, I thought that Plan B allowed us option 2, which was Plan BC. Is that correct?
Well, Plan C is the
virtual.
remote. Plan B is the hybrid, and then we have options 1, 2, and 3. Correct.
All right, so what we're recommending is
Okay.
we start remote. Right. That's Plan C from the state.
Okay.
Okay. And then with remote, you can have the virtual academy run concurrent with that. All right, so the first part of the equation is, are you okay with starting remote for the first 9 weeks? Again, that period's something the board can talk about. When we get to the first 9 weeks, or that period is, then we can switch to Plan B, which is alternating face-to-face for grades K through 8, and then high school would be remote. And you can still run the virtual academy. That still runs concurrently. So that's really what we're recommending is everybody starts remote to start the school year off. Go through a period of time. Then we transition to high school stays remote, virtual academy stays in place, the K-8 will then start face-to-face alternating weeks. Great.
Then I second Dr. Fitch's motion.
Dr. Wilson, another comment.
So
Was that a Brooklyn whistle? What was that?
that sounded weird.
Dr. Wilson's microphone.
I don't know if
That was
my mic
feedback.
is, can you hear me in this mic?
Can you hear her now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that was. It might be mine, it might not. So in the Plan B, you have different options within Plan B. We recommend option F because it is the hybrid model. When we looked at A, B, C, D, E, and F, A through E were very tight in what they said. And we didn't want to pick an option that was so tight. We went with option F from DPI. Within that option F is called the hybrid model. We can make it look like what we want it to look like. And so based on the survey results and based on talking with different groups, we went with having the virtual academy. That's easy to figure out because that's in all 3. Having the remote learning for pre-K through 12, and that's in B and C. And then the parts that are a little different in B that we wanted as well would be the blended model where we would be alternating weeks. And the only reason we chose the alternating weeks part was, again, based on what the families had said. We could have gone with alternating days. We could have gone half a day every day, but that's not what the families had chosen. So we chose the alternating weeks. And that would be for pre-K through 8, the alternating weeks. So we were trying at that point to try to get as many as we could back into the building. And then the other population that we really wanted to make sure that could get into the building every day was our Extend 1 and our OCS. And we had that face-to-face. So that was, we had worked with, we thought that we could make that work through staffing and transportation-wise. Does that make,
That makes better, and I'm stepping all over your motion, I'm sorry.
That's all right. This is the point for discussion.
But,
Second was already
no,
made.
yeah, but tell me when options 1, 2, and 3 come into play.
okay,
Because I think that might be where I'm getting tripped up.
that's okay. I understand. So if we go to, Dr. Mills, would you share that screen?
Yeah.
again?
Don't make me do 2 pages.
That was
Okay.
that side. He's
Yeah,
gonna put
do
up
that side
he's
by
gonna
side.
put that
Side by side.
Do side by
comparison,
side.
yeah.
And you don't have to go through them. I just want to know when the
That's
family,
why
the family
you
option
want to trade
comes
me.
into play,
They're all,
or what this is.
I'm sorry, Ms. Thorson was
They
asking
can
a
choose.
question.
Oh.
They can choose that now.
So in option, let's talk about the option 2 that's on the right.
Okay.
All right, we'll talk about that one first.
Okay.
That one is available in Plan B and Plan C.
Okay.
Okay, because that's the remote learning one. We think about that one as if the families who want their students to be in remote learning until they feel comfortable that their child can come to school.
So are these 3 choices a subset of hybrid F?
That would be correct.
That's what I needed to
Yes.
know.
That's-
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
We're on the same page now.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
We've got a motion and a second.
And that was the.
Are we, any further discussion or questions? Okay, I don't know if I can repeat a motion after all that discussion or not, but if I understand it correctly, the motion is to accept the recommendation of the administration, which is we start with remote learning pre-K 12 after a period of time, which allows us, we will transition to an hybrid or alternate weeks for pre-K 8 and continue with the remote for 9, 12, and also include from the beginning the virtual academy. Is that correct?
Make sure you're adding in and extend on and OCS being face-to-face.
That too.
Okay.
One more question. How are you going to use the the letter? I'm looking for the word parent registration. Somebody help me out.
Orientation.
How are you-
Orientation.
Registration.
Okay, how are you going to get the parent desires in that option?
So there is at the bottom of that,
Right, well, I know there's an online one and a paper one. How, is that still a directive as part of your suggestion? I mean, what's the need for that parent commitment letter if you're going with this option? Help me understand that.
so even in Plan C, we need to know, so if the board chooses to go with Plan C, we need to know if parents are going to want to do remote learning until we go into Plan B, or do they want to go with the virtual academy? So we need to know those 2 choices.
And so that would go out and still need to be returned quickly.
Yes, ma'am. And that's what we were thinking, that it could be done within about a week's time. Because there will be some parents who want their students to come back into the school, and they would go choose the remote learning piece. That's that option 1 in that Plan B. And then
Right. And
option
but
2.
that's why I was not thinking that we needed 146 teachers, since I don't believe 140 parents of all those children are going to want to come back to school. I do understand now that you still are going to do the letter, that parents get to choose what they want quickly.
Yes, ma'am. We need to get that information from them. And it could be that to where, like, all of our students that we have in our whatever grade levels, and then the parents choose, say, the virtual academy, take them off the top, then we make sure that we are staffing the virtual academy. And then for the students who are in the remote learning. So that's how we were looking at it, is that we needed to look at those two subgroups and think about the staffing for each of those.
But one thing I know in the frequently asked questions that once the governor says that everyone can go back to school, then remote learning is no longer an option, but virtual academy remains an option.
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
That's correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Any further questions or comments? Hearing none. If you're in, when you called upon, if you're in favor, aye, if not, nay. Ms. Boyette?
Nay.
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Farmer?
Aye.
Dr. Fitch?
Aye.
Mr. Breen?
Nay.
Pardon me?
Nay.
Ms. Powell?
Aye.
And myself, Henry Mercer, aye. It passes with a vote of 5-2, 5 ayes, 2 nays. Madam Chair, it's back to you.
Okay. When we take those votes and there are nay votes, please let the record reflect that the nay votes were Mrs. Boyette and Mr. Breen. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the North Carolina Alternative Schools Accountability Model. I think we have to do this every 3 years for the alternative school. Is that correct? Every year. Every year. So we are needing to do the accountability model for the Daniels Learning Center. And your recommendation to us is that we use
Same one we've typically been doing, which is they just pay the progress model.
which is option B. Members of the board, do you have any questions in regard to the accountability model option for 2021 for Daniels Learning Center? Hearing none, the floor is open for a motion in regard to this item.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell?
I move that we approve to participate in option B for Daniels Learning Center.
Second.
It has been moved by Mrs. Powell, and was that Mrs. Boyette that seconded? Yes, okay. It has been moved by Mrs. Powell, seconded by Mrs. Boyette, that we approve the alternative accountability model B for the 2021 school year. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, let it be known by the sign of aye. Mrs. Boyette?
Aye.
Mr. Breen?
Aye.
Mr. Farmer?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer?
Aye.
Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
And myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We are now down to the draft and revised policies. We had this discussion last Monday, and you have the information in regard to those policies. What is your pleasure? This is the second read.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Breen,
I move that the board approve the policies listed on the agenda under Roman numeral 6-7, discussion action items, letter D, draft and revised policies 1 through 19 as a second reading, and repeal the corresponding old policies as set forth on the handout dated July 20th, 2020.
Second.
it has been moved by Mr. Breen, seconded by Mrs. Boyette, that the board approve the policies listed on the agenda under Roman numeral 7, discussion action items, letter D, draft and revised policies 1 through 19 as a second reading, and repeal the corresponding old policies as set forth in the handout dated July 20th, 2020. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, please record your vote. Mrs. Boyette?
Aye.
Mr. Breen?
Aye.
Mr. Farmer?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer?
Aye.
Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. Mr. Farmer?
Hang on one second. I'm with you. Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir.
hang on one second. Want to make sure.
Yes,
All
sir.
right, I'm good. Madam Chairman, I move the County Board of Education go into closed session to consider confidential personnel matters as provided in North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A1 and 6 and 115C-319 through 321 to consider confidential student matters as provided in North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A1 and North Carolina General Statutes 115C-402 and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act 20, United States Code 1232G, and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A3.
Is there a second? It has been moved by Mr. Farmer, seconded by Mrs. Boyette, that the Wilson County Board of Education go into closed session to consider confidential personnel matters as provided in North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A1 and 6 and 115C-319 through 321 to consider confidential student matters as provided in North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A1 and North Carolina General Statutes 115C-402 and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act 20, United States Code 1232G, and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A3. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, Mrs. Boyette?
Aye.
Mr. Breen?
Aye.
Mr. Farmer?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer?
Aye.
Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. We are now adjourned to closed session.